Chapter 2593 Shield of the Medusa's Gaze. It sounds like you know something about the charming god's Jian. But do you know what power it has? Han Sen's heart leaped at the possibility. Meng Lai might be able to tell him the type of power the purple copper Jian possessed. Meng Lai looked at Han Sen as if he knew what he was thinking. But he still said, "I'm afraid you will be disappointed. The charming god's Jian is the strongest race weapon in existence. And it is also the weakest race weapon in existence. It is strong because it has the power to supercharge a person's charm. The Fox Alpha used it to attract everyone. If it was used well, it could make 1,000 races obey that alpha. I also say it is weak, because its powers of simple destruction are bad. It won't help you now." "So, you are saying it has no attack power? And therefore, it is useless?" Han Sen didn't believe him. He fired at Meng Lai. A shockwave was created in space, and with it the purple copper Jian disappeared. When Han Sen had used the purple copper Jian to defeat the monster in the black hole spider's belly, it had revealed its true strength. Han Sen didn't believe it lacked destructive powers. Pang! When Han Sen's attack reappeared, Meng Lai slashed at the Jian. His strike came against the purple copper Jian. Han Sen's face changed. Both of his hands moved to grab the purple copper Jian. But the weapon's power was still active. Han Sen tried his hardest to hold its grip, but the purple copper Jian struck his chest. He was sent flying, like an asteroid striking a planet. He was pinned to a mountain. Han Sen lowered his head and looked at the purple copper Jian in his chest. That Jian had previously pierced through Meng Lai's chest, but he didn't expect karma would repay the same strike so soon. Han Sen clutched the handle of the Jian and tried to pull it out. But before he could use any strength, Meng Lai's gold godly body appeared. He attacked with his gold lion head knife. His scary gold knife light looked like it was going to cut the planet in half. The little red bird screeched like a phoenix. The fire in its mouth became a sea of angry flames that rained down on Meng Lai. It tried to stop Meng Lai casting that knife light to destroy Han Senator, but the little red bird was still only primitive, and the knife in Meng Lai's right hand had the same level of power. His right hand turned that power into a shield that covered the sky. It extinguished the little red bird's fire. Seeing this, Miss Mirror sighed. In the end, Han Sen still needs to die. It would have been okay if he had just killed Bai Yi. He might have still been allowed to live. But now that he has the true god shield of the Medusa's gaze, and the race weapon of the fox, he must die. Boom! A scary gold knife light appeared, and the whole planet exploded. The destruction caused by the gold knife light was so bright that the entire galaxy shone with its radiance. Shockwaves washed through the system. Han Sr., Isha was engaged with Miss Mirror, so she couldn't go and help. When she saw that explosion of power, her face fell. "Captain, it is all over." Far away, inside the white whale, all of the pirates were shocked. Their faces looked cold. Even a deified would have died if they were hit by that much power. Plus, Han Sen wasn't deified. He only used treasures of that class. The pirates were thinking about whether or not they should kneel and beg. If they did, they might be permitted to live. On the other hand, the captured Extreme King Knights inside the white whale were delighted. Han Sen is dead. You guys are next. One of the Extreme King Knights said menacingly to a pirate. Ain't a slap. The Extreme King Knight who said that was smacked to the floor. Bauer then went to clean her hand, as if she had touched something dirty. The Extreme King Knight was rolling around on the floor, clutching his injured face. His teeth had been broken, and his jaw had been shattered. The other Extreme King Knights didn't say anything more. They had almost forgotten that the little demon was still on board the ship. Bauer looked at the Extreme King Knights. They all lowered their heads, not daring to meet her gaze. "My dad won't die," Bauer said with disdain. Then she looked back out into space. The Extreme King Knights didn't say anything to the contrary, but they thought to themselves, Han Sen only has a few deified weapons. How could he possibly compete with Meng Lai? He will be dead. And up next will be you little demon. After a while, the power shining around the wreckage of the planet began to dim. And then, Fong Qingyu suddenly shouted, Han Sen isn't dead. The pirates and the Extreme King Knights looked over there. They couldn't believe their eyes. They saw Han Sen suspended in space, holding a shield that had protected his body. Due to the fact that the planet had exploded, his armor and feathers were a little blackened. But he hadn't been badly wounded. The worst wound he had was the wound delivered by the purple copper Jian, which was in his chest. I forgot you have the shield of the Medusa's gaze. But the Medusa's gaze isn't a race weapon. It isn't smart enough. It won't follow your orders, and you cannot use it like the charming god's Jian. It would be annoying if it did. Meng Lai's eyes were on fire as he looked down at the shield of the Medusa's gaze. Han Sen coughed, and a trickle of blood spilled over his lips. He looked at Meng Lai coldly and said, "Are you sure I cannot use it?" The shield of the Medusa's gaze was the true god weapon of the Alpha of the Ghana, Meng Lai said with a sneer. Back then, it was a deified weapon that was in the top 10 in existence. Its power was comparable to the Ghana's race weapon Purgatory Heaven. But there is a big difference between true god weapons and race weapons. Race weapons are their own life forms in a way. They can think for themselves and make judgments. If they approve of a user, then the user can still activate their power, even if the creature's level is low. But true god weapons are different. Without true god powers, you cannot make use of a true god weapon's power. If a low-level deified has the same element as the true god weapon, they can use a little of its power. But you aren't deified, and your power isn't compatible with the shield of the Medusa's gaze. So you cannot activate its power. You cannot tap into 1/10,000th of its power. You can only use it as an ordinary shield. It is a shame that the shield of the Medusa's gaze is a shield. Despite that, its power doesn't lie in defense. Meng Lai said all of this, and then he generated a scary gold power. The gold lion head knife now possessed a god light that shocked the whole world. It was like the universe was going to be cut in half by this god light. Seeing that Meng Lai was going to unleash that knife light, Han Sen's face didn't change. He still held the shield of the Medusa's gaze tight. As he watched that seemingly all-powerful knife light form, the power in his body madly rushed into the shield of the Medusa's gaze. There was a weird, pretty-looking woman carved atop the shield. Suddenly, a light appeared in her closed eyes. Chapter 2594 One Eye Empty Impossible. Meng Lai's face changed as he saw the eyes of the woman atop Han Sen's shield begin to glow. His face grew pale. When the Ghana entered the Geno Hall long ago, they hadn't needed to fight in order to light a lantern. At that point in history, there were many Geno lanterns that remained unlit. But that didn't mean that the Ghana weren't strong. Later, the Ghana Alpha used Purgatory Heaven and the shield of the Medusa's gaze, both of which were deified weapons, to control the world. Very few could fight them. People like Ancient Water God couldn't even enter the door to the Geno Hall. But the Ghana Alpha had fought inside the hall for a few days before she fell. That proved how strong she was. For ordinary races, the strongest deified weapon would be their race weapon. The Ghana Alpha had the Ghana's race weapon Purgatory Heaven, but her strongest deified weapon was the shield of the Medusa's gaze. Because of this weapon, she was able to control most creatures in the world and fight them. Meng Lai heard about how powerful the shield of the Medusa's gaze was, but he had never seen it himself. If he had been able to choose, he would have opted to never lay eyes on the terrifying power of the shield of the Medusa's gaze. And the last thing he would ever hope for would be to end up as its target. Die! Meng Lai roared, gnashing his teeth. He sent all his power into his gold soldier king body. A scary knife light fell with incredible power. He wanted to kill Han Sen before he activated the shield of the Medusa's gaze. Meng Lai couldn't allow that ancient weapon to fully activate. The gold knife light was like a cosmic aurora that could break the sky and destroy the ground. It wasn't something a mere shield could block. That scary power was everywhere. Han Sen would be killed even if he hid behind the shield. Han Sen had no other choice. He gritted his teeth and poured all of his power into the shield of the Medusa's gaze. He used his power for a final gambit. The people in the White Whale were in shock. The power Meng Lai unleashed was too scary to behold. The amount of energy he had placed in his attack was enough to devastate an entire race. It was like a punishment from God that couldn't be resisted. Mr. Meng Lai is too strong. He earns his reputation as a deified of the extreme king. He is much better than the deified elites of lesser races. Of course, our royal uncle is very special. The Extreme King Knights were all so happy. They hoped Meng Lai's destroying the sky and breaking the Gru Indi attack could kill Han Sen and save them from Han Sen's people. The pirates in Fangqing were all scared. Even if there had been 1,000,000 of them, that strike had enough power to reduce all of them to dust. They couldn't comprehend the amount of power that was being unleashed. The pirates had traveled around the galaxy for years, and they had never seen this sort of power before. Their legs all quivered and they thought, "It is over, it is over. It looks like the captain is going to die here." The captain was quite nice. He didn't mistreat us. If we end up under the Extreme King's thumb, it's hard to tell what will become of us. I don't know if we will be permitted to live. Gu Qingqing and Elysian Moon looked ill. That power was stronger than they knew. Ningyu was holding Bauer, and she was crying. Is he going to kill us too? I don't want to die. The little red bird's mouth continued to spew out its phoenix flames. Its fire became a sea of flames that tried to subdue the gold knife light. But the sea of fire couldn't stop the gold knife light. The flames would explode like fireworks when the light touched them, and the light showed no sign of slowing down. Isha's expression hardened. The teeth knife in her left hand swung through the air, and a space crack headed in Han Sen's direction. A rift appeared next to Han Sr. If Han Sen went through that rift, he could avoid Meng Lai's wrath. But Han Sen didn't see the space crack. His eyes were red. They were too red. It was so scary. He stared at Meng Lai. Han Sen didn't remain immobile, because he didn't want to escape. He simply couldn't. All the power in Han Sen's body was being sucked up by the shield of the Medusa's gaze. The moment the shield of the Medusa's gaze lit up, Han Sen felt as if his power was a wild horse that had escaped its reins. It went thundering into the shield of the Medusa's gaze. His body seemed to have been sucked dry. The power from his 4 Geno arts drained out of him within a second. Han Sen suddenly became emaciated. He looked like a skeleton. It was like some witch had consumed all of his blood, until he was nothing but a bloodless husk. His muscles were dying, and his skin was tight against his bones. He had become a dried-up human. Even the light of the peacock's soul robe dimmed. The rainbow light extinguished, and the peacock king beast's soul almost died. The eyes of the woman on the shield of the Medusa's gaze opened a little. It was like she was half awake and half asleep, with her heavy eyelids barely parted. As those eyes opened, 2 weird purple lights emerged. They shone on the gold knife light that could destroy the universe. In the future, onlookers would have a very difficult time describing what happened next. The strange light from the Medusa's eyes met the terrifying gold knife light, and the knife light froze in place. It wasn't just the gold knife light either. Wherever that weird light shone on, everything froze. Even Meng Lai, who had previously seemed like an untouchable god. Both he and his gold lion head knife were motionless, still caught in mid-slash like a freeze frame from a movie. The purple light continued to shine. It wasn't just Meng Lai beneath that weird light. The purple color was spreading so fast, and many asteroids and planets were caught within it. They were frozen. And still the light spread. If this continued, perhaps the whole system would be frozen. Blurg. Han Sen coughed up some blood. He separated himself from the shield of the Medusa's gaze. The moment Han Sen moved away from the shield of the Medusa's gaze, the eyes of the weird woman on the shield shut. The weird purple light vanished. But that region of space was still frozen in a purple hue. Meng Lai, the gold lion head knife, and the scary knife light hung in space like statues. And the nearby planets had once been spinning, but now they were purple and still. The scene was surreal and unsettling, something that shouldn't have been able to exist. The whole system looked dead. Everyone who could see this stared with open mouths. No one made a sound. The sight before them was too frightening for them to think about, and too strange to understand. They didn't even know how to respond. Miss Mirror waved her hands, and a mirror appeared. She stepped into it and disappeared. Chapter 2595 Chase Star Whip. Let's go. Han Sen returned to the white whale, and allowed Bauer to fly the white whale away. He felt terrible. The energy in his body was all gone, and his flesh was about to collapse. Even his Peacock King soul robe had been drained. If he hadn't used the super god spirit body to separate himself from the shield of the Medusa's gaze, he and the Peacock King's soul robe would have been reduced to ash. Too scary, Hansen thought, still reeling from what had happened. The price of using the shield of the Medusa's gaze was far greater than he could willingly accept. Furthermore, the eyes of the woman on the shield of the Medusa's gaze had only opened a little. Who could fathom how much power would be required to open both of her eyes completely? Until he became deified, Hansen was no longer going to use it. It would kill him. Fortunately, after what happened, no one bothered to hunt him down. Aside from a few space xenogeneics, nothing living bothered him. It wasn't like the Extreme King or other races couldn't find Hansen. They simply didn't dare to. Menglai hung in space like a purple ice sculpture. The people who wanted to chase Hansen down witnessed everything, and they decided that going after Hansen was no longer worth it. The Extreme King paid a high price to remove Menglai from space. Hansen could use the shield of the Medusa's gaze. Every race thought this was unbelievable. It was a true god weapon, and ordinary deifieds couldn't touch it. Hansen was only a king, yet he had somehow accessed the weapon's horrifying power. It made every race fear him, until Hansen figured out how far he could go with the shield of the Medusa's gaze. No one dared to trouble him. If Hansen was able to activate the entire power contained within the shield of the Medusa's gaze, no one would be able to defeat him aside from a true god deified. Now that no one was interfering with his travel, Hansen and his people traveled through the remainder of the systems of chaos in safety. They reached Sky Palace without further danger. But Hansen's situation wasn't good. The shield of the Medusa's gaze had sucked his body dry. After a month, Hansen had yet to recover. The strength of his body had been drastically reduced. His legs were soft when he walked. It would take him another 2 or 3 years to fully recover. Fortunately, no one from the outside was aware of what had happened to him. They were in Sky Palace now as well, so there was no need to worry about security. Sky Palace sent a few elders to welcome Hansen and Isha. They weren't showing such respect because of Isha and the rebate, though. They had come because Hansen was a very important individual. Hansen was able to bless deifieds, and he owned the charming god's Jian and the shield of the Medusa's gaze. Those things made Hansen more valuable to them than the entire race of the rebate. It made Sky Palace treat him seriously. If they knew Hansen also had the 9-spin destiny mirror and the Ghana's race weapon Purgatory Heaven, who knew what they would think? Hansen rested in Sky Palace. Sky Palace sent many powerful deified elites skilled in healing to treat him, but they didn't achieve very good results. Hansen wasn't just injured. He had exhausted his genes, and recovery wouldn't come easy. They were there for a few days when Isha told Hansen that Han Menger was there. It made Hansen very happy. Hansen thought that Narrow Moon might have been affected because of what he had done. It was good that Han Menger and the others were allowed into Sky Palace. But Hansen hadn't seen Han Menger and the others just yet. Isha smiled and didn't explain. She invited Hansen to come with her. They left the xenogeneic space of Sky Palace and headed to a nearby system that was also owned by Sky Palace. Sky Palace owned many systems, and this was an important one within their domain. As Hansen flew alongside Isha, he noticed that his surroundings weren't as he remembered. There used to be many stars in this area of space, but now it was empty. There wasn't even an asteroid. Did a big fight take place here? Did the people of the Extreme King come? Hansen asked Isha with confusion. Isha laughed and didn't say a word. She looked out across space. Hansen followed her gaze. There he saw many stars. It was nothing special. But soon after, Hansen heard the sound of thunder echo through space. Even the vacuum couldn't stop that sound from being transmitted. Hansen looked in the direction that the sound had come from, and then, his mouth dropped open in shock. He couldn't believe his eyes. He was looking at Narrow Moon. All the planets of Narrow Moon moving toward him, heading for the empty section of space that he and Isha hovered in. The scene was extremely shocking. A scary elite of Sky Palace was behind the star. He had a whip. Every time he swung the whip, the crack of thunder sounded. The cluster of stars were like many fat sheep. They were slowly being pushed forward. The very large Narrow Moon was being whipped forward into this place. This can actually happen. Hansen had no idea how to process what he was seeing. He never dreamed of something like this being possible. Isha smiled and said, "If I wasn't prepared, I would never have allowed the people of the rebate to be put at risk. This is a deified weapon of Sky Palace. It is the Chase Star Whip, and it can make stars listen to its commands. I invited Sky Palace's leader to help me move Narrow Moon to this area. That is why we have allied with Sky Palace." Han Sen watched the whole of Narrow Moon be moved into an empty region of space. He assumed that the old system must have been moved elsewhere to keep that region open for Narrow Moon. After Narrow Moon came to rest in its new home, Isha took Han Sen over to thank the Sky Palace elder. The elder smiled and said, "This is only me doing what I should. There is no need to thank me." The elder took the Chase Star Whip with him when he left. Han Sen couldn't wait to enter Narrow Moon. He flew straight to Planet Eclipse and saw Han Menger. He was so happy. The rebate were talking about the deal that allowed them to join up with Sky Palace, but the part that included Han Sen was still something that had to be discussed. Because Han Sen was worth more than the whole of the rebate, Isha only negotiated terms for the rebate themselves. She didn't include Han Sen in the discussions. Sky Palace had come up with many plans, but Han Sen decided to join Sky Palace as a member of the rebate. He didn't join Sky Palace as just himself. By doing that, he lost many of the benefits he could have earned. But Isha had risked so much in the systems of chaos to save him. She moved the whole of the rebate because of it, and she had made enemies of the Extreme King in the process. That was a big favor. Han Sen couldn't abandon the rebate and join Sky Palace alone. Chapter 2596 Big Movie. Han Sen was a part of the rebate now, but he was a very prestigious individual in Sky Palace, and he could come and go as he pleased. He was treated like one of the people of Sky Palace, as if he shared a direct lineage with them. Han Sen even had an island for himself in Sky Palace. It was the Little Jade Island he used to occupy. Little Silver and Little Star were registered to occupy the Little Jade Island as well. Han Sen wanted to use his Blood Pulse Sutra power on them to make their blood stronger, but his body had yet to recover, and so he could no longer do it. Little Silver tried to heal Han Sen's damaged body, using his healing powers, in all of their electrifying glory. His attempt did have a positive effect, but it was fairly minuscule. Han Sen gave the Thunder God Spike to Little Silver. Little Silver and the Thunder God Spike's power could benefit each other, so it would be good for his evolution. He used glasses to examine all the creatures around him. They all had a 5-star potential, and in regards to their real potential, he would find that out once they became deified. One day, Han Sen was on his island sunbathing. Bauer was sitting nearby, still nibbling her purple ginseng. It wasn't getting any smaller, despite her constant gnawing. Little Angel and Zero were preparing lunch. Han Menger was holding the 6-core snake bow, and she was practicing archery. Little Silver and Little Star were lying on the ground quietly. There was a little beast that was like a white snowball scurrying around. Snowball was a creature from the sanctuaries. It was very special, as it could shield itself inside a white orb that couldn't be broken. Han Sen had brought the little creature to the Geno universe back when he was on Planet Eclipse. Snowball had a good relationship with Xiaqing King, and it had spent most of its time in the universe following him about. When Narrow Moon was first brought to Sky Palace, Snowball wasn't there. It had been with Xiaqing King. Han Sen was wondering why Xiaqing King had sent Snowball to him instead of just calling him on the phone. When Han Sen saw the item Snowball had come to deliver, he realized with shock that Xiaqing King's overbearing President Love Luov had been made into a movie that was going to be on air soon. Snowball's delivery of a ticket of admission was a roundabout way of showing off. Han Sen searched the internet of the universe and found that Xiaqing King's overbearing President Love Luov was insanely popular. His title was Teacher Xia. Han Sen tried to find out how many copies of overbearing President Love Luov had been sold so far, and there were many zeros. There were at least 1 billion, Han Sen thought. Good grief! How much did Xiaqing King earn? Han Sen was frozen. No matter how much Han Sen fought or all the deified weapons he earned, he hadn't made as much money as Xiaqing King and his drawings. Should I start drawing something too? Han Sen was interested in the concept, but he realized that his drawing abilities were more than lacking. So he shelved the idea. Sky Palace was going to be screening the movie too. Han Sun brought Han Ming'er with him to watch it. It was just going to be them, so they could have the entire theater exclusively for themselves. When they went to the theater, Han Sun encountered Yun Suyi, Yun Sushang, and Thousand Feather Crane. They were all king class now. They had progressed just as quickly as Han Senator. In fact, Han Sen's progress hadn't been all that fast. He was slowed by his need to fulfill the requirements of 4 separate Geno arts. If he only practiced one, and it wasn't the story of genes, he would have likely been deified by now. Brother Han, are you alright? Yun Suyi asked. Looking at Han Senator, they had wanted to visit the little Jade Island to see Han Sun a while ago, but Sky Palace forbade ordinary people from visiting there. So this was the first time they had seen Han Sun in a long time. Han Sun didn't look so good. His body was all dry like a piece of smoked meat. It took Thousand Feather Crane a minute to recognize him. Much better. I'm almost okay. I was going to visit you guys a few days ago, but Elder Yun wouldn't let me leave the little Jade Island until now, Han Sun explained. We know. We were told the same thing. Or we would have already visited you on the little Jade Island, Thousand Feather Crane said. The movie is going to start. Let's go in. Yun Sushang said with a smile. Han Sun bought the whole theater. There was a lot of space, so he invited them there to watch it all together. Due to Han Sun already knowing what happened in the story, he wasn't too caught up in the movie. He was surprised to see Yun Suyi and Yun Sushang like it as much as they did. They were very excited. They would laugh at times, and at other times weep and cry their eyes out. In the end, the main character rescued a female character. When they kissed, Yun Suyi and Yun Sushang were so touched. Their eyes almost turned into the shape of little hearts. It doesn't matter how strong a woman might be, they all have the same heart. Han Sun couldn't help but sigh. After the movie finished, Han Sun invited the 3 of them to have dinner. They talked comfortably together as they headed back. How come I never hear about Lone Bamboo anymore? Han Sun asked Thousand Feather Crane. He had asked other people about Lone Bamboo, but they were all so dodgy about the subject that he never really received an answer. Thousand Feather Crane hesitated, but Yun Suyi said angrily, "It is because of that exquisite." Exquisite? Han Sun was shocked. He knew the name, but he didn't think exquisite would have anything to do with Lone Bamboo. Suyi stopped talking. Thousand Feather Crane frowned. Is this something I'm not allowed to know about? Han Sun asked, glancing at Thousand Feather Crane. Thousand Feather Crane shook his head and said, Not exactly, but this incident cannot be helped. Even if you know, there is nothing you can do. If it isn't taboo, then why don't you just tell me? Han Sun said. Thousand Feather Crane still hesitated. Yun Suyi had practically told Han Sun the whole story anyway. There was a good connection between Sky Palace and the Very High. People often believe Sky Palace was the mouthpiece for the Very High. Although Sky Palace wasn't one of the 3 highest races, the Extreme King were quite scared of Sky Palace as well. In fact, Sky Palace depended on the power of the Very High. So Exquisite and the other Very High came to Sky Palace. They asked Lone Bamboo and Yu Shanshin to join the Very High, and it was a request that Sky Palace couldn't refuse. Yu Shanshin agreed, whereas Lone Bamboo refused Exquisite's offer. This created some tension and a widening rift between Sky Palace and the Very High. The Very High didn't relent in their request though, and Lone Bamboo didn't waver or give in to their demands. So the leader of Sky Palace locked Lone Bamboo up. Couldn't Lone Bamboo refuse to join the Very High? Han Sun asked with a frown. Thousand Feather Crane shook his head with a wry smile. The relationship between Sky Palace and the Very High is very complicated. It seems as if there was some sort of agreement in place. Our leader is in hot water right now. He cannot refuse the demands of the Very High. If Lone Bamboo is locked up, does that mean that they've dropped their demand? Han Sun asked with a frown. Thousand Feather Crane chuckled and said, Were it so easy, the Very High haven't said anything. They haven't yet said whether or not Lone Bamboo has to go. If they haven't cancelled their request, we have to respond somehow. We cannot sweep this matter under the rug. Chapter 2597 Lone Bamboo's persistence. Han Sun didn't have many ideas on how to resolve the matter. If two armies were fighting and Lone Bamboo was in danger, he would gladly join the fight. But right now, Lone Bamboo was incarcerated by the powers presiding over Sky Palace. Furthermore, they weren't at war with the Very High. Therefore, Han Sen had no way of helping. This is a hard situation to deal with. The Very High didn't want Lone Bamboo to join them permanently. It was supposed to be a temporary thing. Plus, they would have given Lone Bamboo a lot of resources. Others would beg for the benefits he would have been given for free. I don't know why Lone Bamboo would so firmly decide against going, Thousand Feather Crane said with a sigh. Han Sen thought that he understood what Lone Bamboo was thinking, but he hadn't spoken to the man in person yet. Therefore, he didn't know if his guesses were accurate. The next day, Han Sen went to ask the 10th elder, Yin Chongkong, about being allowed to see Lone Bamboo. Yin Chongkong was Yin Suyi and Yin Sushang's father, and he was Thousand Feather Crane's teacher. He had a good relationship with Han Sen, and he didn't deny his request. Maybe you can convince Lone Bamboo that joining the Very High isn't so bad, Yin Chongkong said to Han. Senator Han Sen agreed. Then, Yin Chongkong asked people to take Han Sen to the prison. Han Sen thought Sky Palace was just putting on a show, but when he went to the prison, he learned things weren't as simple as he initially believed. 12 suppressed demon locks were pierced through Lone Bamboo's body. They pinned him to a suppressed demon stone. He was covered in blood. Even his collarbones had been punctured. Han Sen was shocked. You are here. Lone Bamboo's limbs were locked painfully against the suppressed demon stone. And while he was in bad shape, he was still able to smile. It would have been impossible for anyone to look good under the circumstances, though. Those 12 suppressed demon locks had 12 different powers. There was water, fire, thunder, lightning, and 8 other powers that attacked his body continually. Even deified elites might not last very long under these conditions. It wasn't like it would kill him, but being tortured like this day and night was a fate that was worse than death. Is treating you this poorly really necessary? Han Sen demanded, growing a little angry as he looked at Lone Bamboo. Lone Bamboo was a student of the leader of the Sky Palace. He had the blood of Sky Palace's people, and yet he was treated in this manner. There wasn't an ounce of sympathy being shown for him, and so the sight would give anyone a nasty chill. Don't be mad at them. This is all my own doing. Lone Bamboo chuckled bitterly. Han Sen brought out a bottle he had smuggled in. He gave Lone Bamboo a few sips of the beverage. After swallowing some himself, he asked, "Why do you refuse to join the Very High?" Lone Bamboo licked the wine on his lips and said, "Joining the Very High would be very good for me. If I don't go, it might take me a decade or two to become deified. If I go to the Very High, I could become deified in only 3 years. If you understand that, then why don't you go?" Han Sen asked, looking at Lone Bamboo. He knew that the man must have his reasons. Lone Bamboo looked at Han Sen and didn't answer his question. He asked, "You like running naked?" I guess I don't." Han Sen didn't know what Lone Bamboo meant, and so his answer was uncertain. Lone Bamboo smiled and said, "I don't like it either. So, no matter how many benefits the Very High offer me, or how much punishment I must endure, I'm not going to the Very High." "What do you mean? Are you saying the Very High like to run naked? You must take off all your clothes while you're there?" Han Sen imagined exquisite and Likir frolicking naked. It was an image that made him smile. Of course, Han Sen was just joking. He knew the Very High wouldn't be that creepy. The Very High's Very High sense can sense anything in the world. If you are chosen by them, you become a medium for them to feel the world. They can feel everything you do. If you eat, they can taste the saltiness, sweetness, sourness, or spiciness of your food. When you shower, they will know if it is hot or cold. Your emotions, your hobbies, or even your feelings when you sleep with a woman. The Very High will get to experience everything. If you were in my position, would you go? Lone Bamboo asked, looking at Han Sr. Are the Very High that sick? Han Sen's eyes were wide. This is merely my perspective. Of course, they might not be interested in which woman you sleep with, but regardless, you have no way of shutting off their power to feel whatever you do. Once you are plugged into their ability, there is no cancellation. They will always have their hooks in you, and I doubt they would ever willingly sever such a connection, Lone Bamboo said. Are you sure that's how this works? Han Sun asked seriously. Lone Bamboo smiled and said, if there is a race in this universe that can understand the very high the most, it would be us, the sky. Although there is no real evidence, many generations of the sky have worked for the very high. This is a 90% accurate hypothesis. If things are like that, then I wouldn't go no matter what, Han Sun said with a nod. Han Sun held the bottle of wine up for Lone Bamboo to have a few more sips. He asked, but if you continue to refuse, will the very high let you go? I don't know, Lone Bamboo admitted with a shake of his head. Han Sun didn't ask anything further. He chatted with Lone Bamboo for a bit longer. And after he finished his wine, he left the prison. Han Sun was walking away. And as he did, he thought to himself, why would the very high want Lone Bamboo so badly? There must be a way I can help him. He left the restricted area and saw a man sitting on a white crane. The man was smiling at Han Sr., Uncle Yu. Han Sun raised his eyebrows at the sight of Yu Shanshin. Yu Shanshin had gone to the lands occupied by the dragons to save Han Sun once before. So, Han Sun was very polite whenever he saw the man. Yu Shanshin smiled and said, we should walk together, assuming that is okay with you. Are you coming for Lone Bamboo? Han Sun asked Yu Shanshin as he followed him. No, I'm here for you, Yu Shanshin answered. That surprised Han Senator before Han Sun said anything. Yu Shanshin went on to say, Sky Palace made a deal with the Very High. So whoever the Very High selects must go. If Lone Bamboo doesn't go, then we must find a worthy replacement. That person you are suggesting can't be me, can it? Han Sun smiled wryly. Aside from Lone Bamboo, the only other one of this generation that can impress the Very High is you, Yu Shanshin said with a smile. I can't do it either, Han Sun said with a vigorous shake of his head. He didn't like running around naked any more than Lone Bamboo. Yu Shanshin had expected Han Sun to react this way. And so he coldly said, I'm sure Lone Bamboo filled you in on what the Very High are like. I waited until now to see you, so that I wouldn't have to waste my breath. Uncle Yu, you don't need to try to convince me. My thoughts on the matter are the same as Lone Bamboo's. I would rather go to prison than go to the Very High, Han Sun said with a shake of his head. Chapter 2598 Extreme Evil Path. Yu Shanshin's expression didn't fluctuate in the slightest after hearing Han Sun's speech. He asked calmly, have you heard the tale of the Sky Alpha known as Suppressed Demon? No. Han Sun wasn't in the mood for a story, but if someone like Yu Shanshin wanted to talk, then Han Sun would listen. Yu Shanshin's smooth voice remained just loud enough for Han Sun to hear him. In ancient times, before the interstellar area, the sky lived on a planet where a demon also resided. It ate people. The demon would eat one person every day. But the demon didn't have its own body. If it wanted to eat someone, it would have to possess the body of one sky to devour the body of another. Because they were unable to prevent the demon from possessing them, the sky had many incidents involving fathers eating their sons, wives eating husbands, or even children eating their grandparents. Those things continued to happen until our Alpha rose to the challenge. He offered himself to the demon and allowed the demon to assume control of his body. And, did the Sky Alpha somehow imprison the demon? Han Sun was curious. No. Our Alpha's power wasn't vastly superior to that of the average sky. The demon gained control of his body too. The demon used him to eat many sky, Yu Shanshin said flatly. That answer wasn't what Han Sun had expected. Yu Shanshin looked at Han Sun and went on to say, although our Alpha was controlled by the demon, he managed to accomplish something more than most possessed sky. Other sky, when they were controlled by the demon, still had their will. But they didn't hate the demon. They were scared of it like a tiger. Even if they pretended not to be, they couldn't lie to the demon. That was because when the demon possessed a sky, it could peer into their thoughts. No matter what that person did, they couldn't lie to the demon. So it didn't matter what they said or did. The demon would still see into their thoughts. The demon would control them and force them to kill themselves. The Alpha was the only exception to this. What did he do? Han Sun had become very curious. He didn't do anything. He befriended the demon, Yu Shanshin said. I thought you said the demon could see through the thoughts of the sky. How could the Alpha trick a demon like that? Han Sun asked with confusion. The sky's alpha must have hated the demon. Yu Shanshin laughed and said, that is why Master Alpha was different. He faced an enemy that he hated the most. Yet he was able to let go of that anger and treat the demon so kindly. It was as if he considered the demon to be his own son. And no matter how much the demon did wrong, he still forgave it. That was a care that came from the heart. In this universe, aside from my Alpha, I have yet to see anyone be able to do the same thing. Are you saying the kindness of Master Alpha touched that demon? Han Sun couldn't guess the ending of this story, so this was his best attempt. Yes, Master Alpha's kindness had an impact on the demon. That demon was only supposed to possess someone for a single day before disposing of the host. But when it entered the Alpha's body, it remained there. It never left him, until Master Alpha found a weakness inside the demon and killed it. He ended the nightmare that had plagued the sky for as long as my people could remember, Yu Shanshin said. Han Sun was blown away by this story. The Alpha had used love to earn the trust of a demon that could read people's minds, and then killed the demon he had grown to love. Han Sun didn't know what sort of person could do that. If he had been in the Alpha's place, Han Sun didn't think he could have achieved the same. Teacher Yu, your Alpha is a real saint. I'm just a normal man. Do you want me to go feed a demon? I can't do it. I would be angered by the very high, and I would likely end up dead. Han Sun understood what Yu Shanshin meant by telling him the story, but he knew that he couldn't do it. Understanding didn't matter. It's okay if you can't do it. I can help you, Yu Shanshin said with a smile. Really? You can help with this? Han Sun asked skeptically. He thought Yu Shanshin must have been yanking his chain. Yu Shanshin laughed and said, do you know why my name is Yu Shanshin? How am I supposed to know something like that? Han Sun thought to himself. But what he said was, I have heard your temper got better when you received this name, Mr. Yu. Was it to make you think more positive things? Yu Shanshin smiled and said, I thank you for thinking so highly of me, but I don't really have positive thoughts. The reason why I am called Yu Shanshin is to tell myself that no matter what happens, I should never give up on myself. It doesn't matter if I become evil or commit a crime no one else can accept. It doesn't matter how much I am hated. At the very least, I can avoid hating myself. I need a good heart to love myself with. Han Sun was frozen. This was the first time he had ever heard someone explain their good heart to someone else. The Geno arts I practice are based on evil powers. If I think of evil things, they will be more powerful. When I was younger, the reason I came to Sky Palace to kill the elders was precisely because of this. But the stronger this Geno art becomes, the more it claims me. I didn't practice the skills of killing. I trained the mental fortitude of not allowing myself to ever be claimed by evil. Only I can control myself in this world. No one else can use me. Not even God. Yu Shanshin was speaking so quietly, but Han Sun could feel the overbearing weight of the man's words. But Han Sun didn't understand how this conversation had anything to do with the very high. Yu Shanshin looked at Han Sun and smiled. The extreme evil path I have practiced doesn't have a sensing power like the very high, but it does contain a unique ability. I can use my evil to possess you, and when the very high use their senses to invade your mind, they will only touch the evil of my mind. And so, all they will feel are my feelings. It will mean that they cannot feel anything about you. That way, you won't have to worry about their invasive senses. You can enjoy all the benefits of the very high without having to worry about being watched. Would you reject a swathe of benefits like that? You can really do that. Han Sun didn't doubt what Yu Shanshin was saying, despite how far-fetched it seemed. Still, he felt compelled to ask. If you don't believe me, we can conduct a test. Meet Exquisite from the very high, and then you can find out if I'm telling the truth or not, Yu Shanshin said with a smile. Chapter 2599 Taoism. Han Sun didn't believe him, but he hadn't yet tried the test that Yu Shanshin had suggested. He wanted to help Lone Bamboo, but he wasn't going to the very high on his friend's behalf. Seeing Han Sun leave, Yu Shanshin smiled. He did not get mad at Han Sun's rejection. Back on the small jade island, Han Sun continued to absorb King Jeans. He wanted to get the story of Jeans to the 9th tier as soon as he could. Han's son called Gu Qingqing over to discuss the matter of lone bamboo. Gu Qingqing listened to his tale and said to him, "Yu Shanxin is correct. It doesn't matter who ends up going, but Sky Palace will need to send someone else to the very high. Their demand cannot be ignored. Sky Palace has many people. Is it necessary for me to go?" Han Sen said. Gu Qingqing shook her head. "It isn't that simple. If it was, Sky Palace wouldn't have put their beloved son in jail. I don't think Sky Palace can choose which individual goes. They will need a person that interests the very high. Otherwise a swap won't work. And that is why Yu Shanxin is trying to convince you. I'm not stupid. I won't go even if they personally invite me. And he wants me to beg before the very high like I'm a slave?" Han Sun said with a lift of his lips. "It isn't like that. To normal people, going to the very high is a grand opportunity. They are the ones who want to do the begging. You and Lone Bamboo are special. If you weren't special, I don't think the very high would care as much as they do now." Gu Qingqing smiled as she spoke. "Is there no other way?" Han Sun asked. "That would depend on Sky Palace. If they don't want to enter a disagreement with the very high, they will have to send someone no matter what." The two of them discussed the matter a little more, but they were unable to come up with any ideas. Their power wouldn't be nearly enough to go against the very high. Whatever they tried would be ineffective. If Lone Bamboo hasn't been taken away, that means there is room for negotiation. We will find a way to navigate through this. Han Sen kept trying to think of a way to help Lone Bamboo as he practiced. "Brother Han, there is a meeting with the very high. Are you joining?" Yin Sui asked with a look of anger. She had come over to visit the little Jade Island. "What meeting?" Han Sun asked with confusion. He had been recovering there for some time, so he hadn't heard a thing about a meeting. Yin Sui explained. "The younger very high in Sky will be exchanging Geno arts. They said there is to be a discussion, but it is more like the very high will talk, and we will just sit there listening." "What will they talk about?" Han Sun asked with curiosity. The Geno arts of the very high are very expansive. They know the Geno arts of many races, so they can talk about anything. "They're really that good? Maybe I should go and listen then." Han Sun didn't really want to go and listen to Geno arts. He just wanted to confirm that this exquisite was the same exquisite he had encountered in the core area. He established a time with Yin Sui. The next night, Han Sun took Bauer and Gu Qingqing with him. He met up with Yin Sui and some other people from Sky Palace. Together, they joined the meeting. The meeting was taking place on Thousand Lake Island. That island was strange. Its center was a lake, and the lake's water constantly spilled onto the lower levels of the island. The whole island was like a sloped collection of lakes. The very high held their meeting at the center of the lake. There was a lotus platform that was around the size of a soccer pitch. It was floating in the center of the lake, and there were pavilions scattered around it. When Han Sun arrived, the meeting area was full of Sky Palace students. Most of the students could only listen from their pavilions. Some of the higher class students were able to sit on the lotus platform itself to talk directly with the very high. They said they were going to occupy the same tables as everyone else, but the very high were actually occupying the primary seats. The Sky Palace students could only sit to the side, and it was usually the Sky Palace students that had to ask questions. The very high were always the ones answering. They were like teachers answering their students. Thousand Feather Crane and the Yin sisters brought Han Sun and Gu Qingqing to the lotus platform. The Sky Palace students knew all about Han Senator. They greeted him and immediately allowed him to take the finest seats. Han Sun only wanted to find someplace random to sit down, but the people there were excited. The Sky Palace students kept pushing him forward, and so he couldn't refuse them. He had to sit down someplace more distinguished. It wasn't like the students of Sky Palace forced him deliberately. Everyone knew about Han Sun fighting Meng Lai in the systems of chaos. There wasn't a person in Sky Palace who hadn't heard the story. He was a king class that could defeat Meng Lai. He deserved to take the #1 seat, above the Sky Palace kings and half-deifieds. Plus, Han Sun was quite famous in Sky Palace. He and Lone Bamboo were called the Knife and Sword Masters. They had become teachers. If Lone Bamboo wasn't there, then it was natural for Han Sun to sit in the most respected position. Not long after, Both sides of the Lotus platform were full of Sky Palace students. But the center seats were still empty. Do the very high really think so highly of themselves? A Sky Palace student asked coldly. It was because of Lone Bamboo that the Sky Palace students disliked the very high. That meeting wasn't going to be as cordial as previous ones. But while everyone discussed the very high, a white jade carriage flew toward them. The jade beasts that pulled the carriage were like tigers of some sort. They looked almost like a mascot. They were obviously special. When Han-sun looked the creatures over, he was surprised. He didn't recognize what species the jade beasts belonged to. But when he felt their presence, he could immediately tell they were deifieds. There were 6 of those jade beasts pulling the carriage. That power was something even Sky Palace's leader could appreciate. Han-sun was surprised by how strong these very high must be when he saw their mode of transportation. But Han-sun's initial assumption that the carriage belonged to Exquisite was wrong. It was for the use of very high who were visiting other races. Many very high used it, so it didn't belong to anyone in particular. The beast carriage drove over to the Lotus platform. There the beautiful jade car's door opened. A man and a woman emerged. Just as Han-sun thought. That woman was Li Qir's third sister Exquisite. But this time, it wasn't Li Qir who was accompanying her. It was a man. The man and the woman walked to the primary seats and bowed before everyone. The man said airily, "I am sorry to have kept you guys waiting. If there are no other matters to discuss, let us get on with it. If you have questions, ask them. My sister and I will try to answer every question we are posed." He sounds way too cocky. He said this was an exchange, but it sounds more like a teacher talking to children. Han-sun thought to himself. While they were talking, Exquisite and the very high man took a seat. The man looked at the Sky Palace students on both sides. He saw Han-sun occupying the first seat with Gu Qingqing next to him. When the man looked at Gu Qingqing's face, his own face froze. He stared at her a little, and then pulled his gaze away. Chapter 2600 God's Spirit Touch. Gu Qingqing's face was breathtakingly pretty. Even those who were close with her, like Han-sun, would find themselves staring at her ethereal beauty now and again. The very high man had only looked at her for a moment or two before turning away. He had an impressive amount of self-control. Exquisite looked at her as well, but her vision paused on Han-sun for longer. After all, he was seated in a place of honor. That meeting had no deifieds. All the attendees were young elites, but if someone was sitting in the first seat, it had to mean that they were someone of prestige and importance to the Sky Palace. But at that moment, Han-sun wasn't looking good. He looked dry and thin, like a refugee that had spent too long without food. He was only skin and bones. "How might I refer to you?" Exquisite asked. Looking at Han-senator, she had seen Han-sen's videos. But that was before he incurred his most recent injuries. He looked completely different right now, so she didn't recognize him. "I am Han-sun," Han-sun answered truthfully. Upon hearing Han-sen's name, that very high man couldn't help but turn to look at him. He clearly knew about Han-sun and what he had accomplished. "You are the one who owns the charming god's Jian and the shield of the Medusa's gaze? It is no wonder you look so special," Exquisite said emotionlessly. By special, she was referring to his physical appearance. She wasn't really complimenting him. From what she could see, Han-sun had simply lucked out by collecting 2 true god treasures. He was lucky and nothing more. That was her general conclusion. She believed the true merit of his power was nothing substantial. Han-sun's face looked sour. He didn't respond. He knew that Exquisite wasn't actually complimenting him. "If no one has any questions, I will start first. Let's talk about phenomenon," the man said calmly. After the man said this, the expressions on the faces of the students of the Sky Palace looked somewhat strained. Phenomenon was a secret Sky Palace geno art, although it wasn't as special as the textless book. When the man said he wanted to talk about phenomenon, it was his way of saying, "The way you practice geno arts is bad. Allow me to show you how it is done." The way the man spoke made many of the Sky Palace students upset, but they were seated before one of the very high, and so no one did anything. The Sky Palace students stared at the man, waiting to hear what he was going to tell them. Han-sun could tell the man had selected this geno art on purpose. He wanted to use this opportunity to build up his image before the young people of the Sky Palace. That was why he spoke in such a condescending way. Han-sun wanted to listen to him too. That very high man was called Bishi, and Han-sun was keen to hear what input he could provide on phenomenon. Phenomenon refers to the universe's phenomena. Phenomenon is the reason for life existing. But people are stupid, and they cannot see through things without phenomena. People require clear signs to clarify the unknowable. The Sky students who heard this weren't impressed. It was an ordinary speech that didn't mean much to them. If they were required to speak, they would have said the same thing. It seemed as if the man knew what everyone was thinking, and so he coldly went on to say, I am one of those people too. I cannot get rid of this foolishness. I cannot see through things without phenomena. So there is a saying, and it goes like this. Only if you go into phenomena and feel the phenomena and experience what is inside, do you have the chance to understand. That is the so-called Taoism. When I practiced phenomenon, the teacher talked about this the first day. Mr. Bishi doesn't need to explain this, so just get to the point, a Sky Palace student said hurriedly. Bishi didn't speak, and his face was unreadable. Since he first met her, Han-sun thought exquisite merely pretended to be detached. But now, seeing Bishi, he noticed this emotionless expression was the only one they were capable of. This wasn't a pretense. Everyone knows Taoism, but in regards to how they know it, everyone has a different saying. There is no correct answer, Bishi said. Taoism is natural. Everyone has their own way of learning it. An answer isn't required, a student of Sky Palace said. I just said that a moment ago, Bishi replied. Phenomenon refers to the phenomena of the universe. If there are phenomena, there are rules. If there are no rules, there would be no reasons. Then, you would not need to learn it. The Sky Palace student fell quiet. He continued listening in silence. Bishi set something down on a table in front of him. Everyone looked at it. It was a square and transparent box that looked to have been made of crystal. It was 12 centimeters wide. Within the box, they could see a crystalline ladybug. It sort of looked like a beetle. It was fairly cute. Bishi opened the crystal box, and the ladybug climbed out of it slowly. Then he said, every living creature has a path to follow, but understanding the reason for each path isn't easy. This is a beetle xenogenic called God's Spirit Touch. It is a very rare xenogenic. Through this, we can understand some of the rules and reasons here. After that, Bishi reached out his finger. He sliced his finger and pushed out a drop of his own blood onto the ladybug. The ladybug opened its mouth and drank that droplet of blood. And then it stopped and remained still. It no longer moved. Everyone was shocked. They didn't know what Bishi was doing. As they watched in confused silence, the ladybug that had sucked up Bishi's blood began to show some weird changes. The ladybug was changing its skin. As it did so, its face contorted. It pulled its new body forward, leaving a perfect shell behind. And the process wasn't over either. After changing a layer of its shell, the ladybug started twisting its body again. It quickly left a second, smaller shell behind. The fist-sized ladybug kept changing its skin. Every time it shed a skin, its body became smaller, and the shells it left behind were like perfect crystal beetle art. Each discarded shell was smaller than the last. As everyone watched, that beetle swapped its skin 9 times. Its body was eventually reduced to the size of a small coin. After that, it stopped moving. It just laid down where it was, looking very tired. Everyone looked at Bishi, waiting for his explanation. They had seen bugs change their skin before, but they didn't know what it had to do with what Bishi had been telling them. The God Spirit Touch is born very sensitive to blood, and it can tell you the quality of your birth genes. The stronger the gene blood, the more effect it will have on the beetle. Ordinarily, the genes of low-tier creatures can enable a beetle to swap its skin once or twice. If someone has high-class genes, the beetle can swap its skin 8 to 10 times. With my very high experience, I can tell you that if someone can make the God Spirit Touch shed its shell 10 times, that means the person conducting the test has genes that are strong enough to see them one day become a true god, Bishi said factually. Chapter 26: 01 Han-sen's test. Why is this process so familiar? Why do I feel like this is the same concept as the crystallizer glasses? Han Sun looked at the God Spirit touch on the table, deep in thought. The people of Sky Palace were observing the God Spirit touch. They didn't believe the God Spirit touch could reveal such amazing information. If their future was able to be decided by an insect, then what was the point of continued practice? It's just a bug. How can it decide our fate? Thousand Feather Crane asked in annoyance. He was speaking aloud what everyone else in Sky Palace was thinking. Bishi looked as cold as he always did. He looked at Thousand Feather Crane and said, although it is not 100% accurate, its margin for error is small. If you people don't believe me, you are welcome to give it a try. How do we give it a try? Thousand Feather Crane asked, looking at the coin-sized God Spirit touch ladybug. Bishi didn't speak. He reached his hand out to tap the God Spirit touch. The God Spirit touch's body shivered. Then it climbed back into the bug shells it had previously shed. Layer by layer, it pulled itself back into the bug shells to recompose itself. They fit around it without a single seam showing. If they hadn't witnessed that, the crowd would never have suspected that the bug had 9 layers of the shell to shed. Now Bishi said, give him a drop of your blood. It will eat your blood and start removing its shells, per the genes within your blood. Thousand Feather Crane didn't hesitate. He put out his finger and squeezed out a droplet of blood. He allowed the God Spirit touch ladybug to swallow the droplet of blood. But this time, the ladybug only shed 7 layers of its shell. Then it stopped moving. It looked exhausted again. 7 armor talent. Not bad. If your luck doesn't work against you, you can become deified and even reach the rank of transmutation, Bishi said, looking intently at the God Spirit touch. I just say this bug has gotten tired. And that is why he stopped moving after taking off 7 layers of its shell, Yun Suyi said with a slight sneer. All of the Sky Palace students agreed. They all doubted the truthfulness of the God Spirit touch's ability. Third sister, why don't you show us? Bishi said, looking at Exquisite. Exquisite nodded. She used her finger to touch the head of the God Spirit touch. The God Spirit touch put on its layers of shell again. Exquisite fed it a droplet of her blood. As everyone watched, the bug started to shed its layers of armor again. It removed 9 layers of the shell. If you guys still don't believe us, you are welcome to try it yourselves. The genes of the sky are quite good when compared to most of the higher races. A 5-rank gene talent is most common, but it isn't hard to get 7 or 8. 9 is very rare though. Right now in the sky, we have only been able to confirm that Lone Bamboo and Yu Shangxi have a 9 armor talent, Bishi said. People still didn't believe it, and Yun Suyi suddenly said, it is easy to tell if this bug is accurate. Please enlighten us, Bishi said while looking at Yun Suyi. The Sky Palace students all looked at Yun Suyi as well. Yun Suyi looked at Bishi and confidently said, you said Lone Bamboo had a 9 armor talent, right? That is correct, Bishi answered with certainty. Then it is easy, Yun Suyi said with a laugh. She looked at Han Sun and said, if Lone Bamboo has a 9 armor talent, then I present to you Brother Han, who has the same skill as Lone Bamboo. I think he is as talented as Lone Bamboo. Would you not agree? Right. Brother Han and Lone Bamboo are similar. Perhaps we should allow Brother Han to give it a try. The Sky Palace students were all in agreement. Han Sen's reputation in Sky Palace was as solid as Lone Bamboo's, and he had done so much outside of Sky Palace to exceed everyone's expectations of him. He had even taken down the Extreme King's 4th uncle. If the bug said Han Sun wasn't talented, they wouldn't believe in the insect's accuracy. Maybe not. Bishi looked at Han Sun and coldly said, the gene talents of the crystallizers have flaws in them. They are only advanced in their intelligence. They don't exceed others in any capacity. Most of their race is like that. Even a few of the mutated ones aren't much different. They might gain 1 or 2 additional shells. Having 3 more is incredibly rare. Having 3 more shells is great. If normal crystallizers have a 6 armor talent, then it isn't outlandish to believe Brother Han might have a 9 armor talent, Yun Suyi said. The sky are a high race. Ordinary people of the sky have a 5 armor talent. The crystallizers are not a high race. Ordinary crystallizers only have 3 or 4 armor talents. My race has seen many crystallizers, and tested them with the God Spirit touch. 4 armor talents are very rare. And I have never seen one with a 5 armor talent, Bishi said levelly. If Brother Han cannot test and display a 9 armor talent, then it proves the God Spirit touch isn't accurate, Yin Sui surely said. I agree. Brother Han's skill. If he doesn't get a 9 armor talent, that means the bug is faulty. Yes. If Brother Han doesn't have a 9 armor talent, then further testing is unnecessary. Even if he has a 9 armor talent, it is useless. We cannot reach Brother Han's achievement. That means the results from this thing are pointless. All of the Sky Palace students were excited. Some of them weren't actually suspicious of the God Spirit touch. But this was about Lone Bamboo. Bishi and the others had made them mad. The Sky Palace students weren't fond of Bishi and Exquisite, and that was why they were so excited. I cannot tell you if it is real or not. We will have to find out through further testing. Bishi remained emotionless. It was like his face was wearing a mask that never moved. Han-sun didn't want to participate in such a test. It was none of his business, but the Sky Palace students were begging him to. So he stood up and walked next to Bishi. Bishi didn't say much. He pressed the God Spirit touch's head to have it scurry around, collecting all of its shells. Then he told Han-sun, "It's ready." The genes of humans aren't stable, and even the crystallizer glasses weren't able to tell me anything. I wonder if this God Spirit touch can do what the glasses couldn't, Han-sun thought to himself. Then, he squeezed out some blood from his finger and held it in front of the God Spirit touch. The God Spirit touch sucked Han-sun's finger, pulling Han-sun's blood into its belly. The people of Sky Palace observed the God Spirit touch nervously. Bishi and Exquisite watched the God Spirit touch as well. They were interested to see how much armor talent he had. As everyone watched, the God Spirit touch's body shivered. It twitched slowly as it processed the blood it had taken in. Chapter 26:02 Han-sun's gene talent. After the God Spirit touch's body shivered, it quickly emerged from its first shell. It left the empty shell behind. I wonder how many layers of shell Teacher Han can make the God Spirit touch leave behind. Some of the Sky Palace students had studied directly underneath him back when he was a teacher, so they were used to calling him Teacher Han. It's difficult to tell. If that God Spirit touch is accurate, Teacher Han's rating won't be that high. It's true that the genes of the crystallizers aren't very strong. Everyone whispered to each other in hushed discussions as the God Spirit touch removed its 3rd layer of shell. Then it removed its 4th. It had removed 4 layers of shell in total. Han-sun was excited about this. Glasses hadn't been able to determine the talent of humans, but this God Spirit touch seemed to be capable of doing so. This ladybug could conduct a test no matter what level you were. If a person wasn't deified, Glasses showed a max rating of 5 stars. But that was to be expected. Glasses could only collect a certain amount of information by scanning. That wasn't bad, considering that it couldn't directly analyze blood like the ladybug could. Glasses couldn't be expected to be as accurate as the God Spirit touch. That pair of glasses is like some kid's education tool. The crystallizers must surely have some better tools somewhere. As Han-sun was thinking about this, the God Spirit touch removed its 5th layer of shell. It's still peeling off its skin. It looks like Brother Han's talent is exceptional, Thousand Feather Crane complimented, as he watched the God Spirit touch remove the 7th layer. Bishi and Exquisite were both surprised. The evolutional capabilities of crystallizer genes were not high. It wasn't bad to have a 4 armor talent, but a 7 armor talent was a little too much. He must have experienced a lot of mutations to see the gene potential reach such numerical heights. But then, after the God Spirit touch removed its 7th armor, it continued to peel off more. He has an 8 armor talent. Exquisite and Bishi were shocked. The concept seemed impossible. One of the crystallizers shouldn't have been able to evolve that much. Even if a deified placed his deified genes into the body of a crystallizer, it still couldn't guarantee that a weak crystallizer could show an 8 armor talent. But it didn't seem to be ending there either. The God Spirit touch, after the removal of the 8th shell, continued to shiver and shake. It looked as if it had an itch, and that was why it was removing its skin. When the God Spirit touch removed another layer of its shell, The Sky Palace students were beaming with unbridled joy. It looks like this bug is accurate after all. It is better than some guy making a random judgment. No wonder Brother Han is considered an equal to Lone Bamboo. His gene talents are excellent. Teacher Han is so smart. If he worked harder, he could be greater than the very high. That is all a 9 armor talent can do? Brother Han reached that prestige easily. What was that guy saying? Didn't he say crystallizers can't have a 9 armor talent? The Sky Palace students weren't fond of Bishi and Exquisite, due to the very high's treatment of Lone Bamboo. They wouldn't let this opportunity go. The kings and half-deifieds didn't say anything horrible, but the nearby students wouldn't stop talking. They mocked the two very high continually. Bishi and Exquisite weren't paying attention to the snide remarks of the Sky Palace students though. They merely looked at Han Sun and frowned. The gene talent of crystallizers cannot reach 9 armors. Unless this Han Sun isn't one of the crystallizers. Either that, or his genes evolved due to some very unique circumstances. That's the only way he could achieve a 9 armor talent. No matter what the cause though, we should be wary of this Han Sun, Bishi said seriously. Exquisite nodded. 9 armor talents are rare. I didn't expect to see this result from a crystallizer. If he evolved, he must have received a boost that we can't possibly fathom. That is how his genes have evolved so much. Exquisite didn't doubt that Han Sun was a crystallizer. Crystallizers were easy to recognize. And when Kong Fei lit up the lantern to create the race of the No, many of the elites saw Han Sun accompanying him. They had immediately known that he was a crystallizer. Back then, Han Sun was too low level. The deified elites were able to see through his genes with ease. And there was no way for Han Sun to hide the identity of his genes back then. There was no way he could have masked his race. So Bishi and Exquisite believed Han Sun must have stumbled upon some ancient secret that allowed his gene talents to become so scary that they were almost as good as the very highs. But neither of them thought there was anything sketchy about the fact that he had a 9 armor talent. 9 armor talents, while rare, did exist. Some of the Extreme King and the Sky could produce the 9 armor talent result. That was especially true of the Extreme King. Their powerful king bodies could reach a 9 armor talent. So, having a 9 armor talent didn't interest Bishi and Exquisite. It all came down to a person's intelligence. Bishi's silkworm was Yushanshin. Exquisite wanted Lone Bamboo. They were happy with their silkworms. Even if Han Sun had a 9 armor talent, they still believed their silkworms were better. But what happened next shocked Bishi and Exquisite. Even if they hadn't practiced the very high forget love, their emotions would have been colder than the average person's. But now, their faces changed as they looked upon the God Spirit touch. That God Spirit touch had removed 9 layers of its shell, but now its body moved to peel off another. How is that possible? Bishi and Exquisite were in shock. Even amongst the very high, not many could produce a 10 armor talent figure. The Sky Palace students were overjoyed. Yin Suyi was smiling as she said, Brother Han really is different. He has a 10 armor talent. No wonder Han Sun has been able to achieve so much. He is so talented, Yin Suzhang said with a smile. The other Sky Palace students weren't as polite as the Yun sisters though. They were all laughing. I thought a 9 armor talent was good, but apparently it isn't. Teacher Han randomly tested it and received a 10 armor talent result. Right. I bet they just started gushing about how crystallizer gene talents would be bad, because they only had a 9 armor talent. You guys don't understand. Whoever is born first is bigger, and in that case, 9 is bigger than 10. You are right. No wonder they're so confident. As the Sky Palace students continued to mock, the God Spirit touch crawled out of the front of its shell and left behind a layer of armor that was like a coin. A 10 armor talent. He really does have a 10 armor talent. Exquisite, and Bishi looked at Han Sun with astonishment. It wasn't hard to find a silkworm with a 9 armor talent, but a 10 armor talent silkworm would be very hard to achieve. If there were no accidents, and he was given enough resources, a person with a 10 armor talent had a high chance of becoming a true god. But something even more shocking happened. After the God Spirit touch peeled off its 10th layer, it continued to move. Chapter 26:0311 Armor Talent? Exquisite and Bishi were so shocked. A 10 armor talent was the highest that a creature of the universe could achieve. Although legends said that a sacred 11th armor talent did exist, that would be something reserved for mythical beings like God. Everyone knew of the very high Alpha, the ancient God King, and the sacred leader. They were mythical figures who fought legendary battles in ancient times. They breached the Geno Hall and became known throughout the annals of history. There were many others, too, whose legends were passed down through the history of the universe. But legends were just legends. No one knew if they had ever even been tested by a God spirit touch. Exquisite and Bishi, who were both born in the very high, had never seen an 11 armor talent before. But now the God spirit touch was still moving. It looked as if it was actually going to shed its 11th layer of shell. Is this crystallizer man as strong as the very high Alpha, the ancient God King, and the sacred leader? Exquisite was in shock. Even with her personality, she couldn't keep her eyes from growing wide. She looked at Han's son and the moving God spirit touch in disbelief. The Sky Palace students were quiet too. They thought something had to be wrong. They had been mocking Exquisite and Bishi only a moment before. But now they too were thinking these results were a little too ridiculous. It was fair to admit that the very high were the strongest race. Their talent was top dog, and even Bishi and Exquisite had a 9 armor talent. But Han's son had received 10, and the process still wasn't over. Teacher Han's talent is a little too much, the Sky Palace students thought in shock. The students of Sky Palace always knew Han's son had absurd talents. But it was too shocking to consider that his talent might have actually exceeded those of the very high. They almost couldn't believe it. After all, the crystallizers of the universe were famous for their technology. Their gene evolution was known to be poor. This was their weakest aspect, and right now, it was trampling the very high. It was pretty ridiculous. Under the weight of every pair of eyes at the meeting, the beetle that looked around the size of a nail continued to shake. Its body contorted, twisted, and spun with its mouth open. And then a smaller bug emerged. That bug was only the size of a grain of rice. It was oval in shape, and it didn't look like a God spirit touch anymore. Before, whenever it shook off one of the initial 10 layers, it still looked like a ladybug. But this grain-sized creature was like a silkworm. It was oval in its shape. It looked cute, and it was quite fat. Everyone was looking at the bug in shock. Even Bishi and Exquisite looked stunned. They owned the God spirit touch, but this was the first time they had ever seen the God spirit touch behave this way. They had never seen it remove its 11th shell before. Does he really have an 11 armor talent? Exquisite looked at Han's son and the God spirit touch with a queer stare. Her eyes kept twitching as thoughts ran through her mind. Han's son looked at the God spirit touch on the table. He kept thinking, weird. When glasses tested me, it just told me that my genes were unstable. I was unable to get a result. How can this bug keep peeling away its layers? If Exquisite and Bishi are correct about its accuracy, then that means my talent is awesome. But Han's son didn't feel as if his talents were strong. At least, that was the way he felt when he practiced with the story of genes. Whenever he had to work with that, he felt practically useless. His ability to continue leveling up was completely dependent on resources. As Han's son was thinking, the God spirit touch moved. It shook and shivered frantically. As it moved toward Han, Senator Bishi and Exquisite were shocked about this too. The God spirit touch was just a xenogenic Bishi had captured. Although it was half deified, it wasn't deified yet. It couldn't fight. Due to the fact that it was very sensitive to the genes in one's blood, it was a very rare xenogenic. Usually, any very high that encountered a God spirit touch would try to claim and tame it with secret skills. The God spirit touch was loyal until its master died. Only then would it try to find another master. If Bishi didn't give a command, the God spirit touch wouldn't move. But right now, although Bishi hadn't given a single order, the little creature started moving over toward Han's Senator. This shocked Bishi. Bishi's heart jumped. He tried to call the God spirit touch back, but it ignored his command. It kept crawling over to Han's son, and that gave Bishi a shock. What is going on? Bishi looked dumbfounded. He couldn't understand this, and he looked at Han's son and the God Spirit touch with a befuddled expression. The God Spirit touch was a half-deified xenogeniac, but its power wasn't like that of an ordinary xenogeniac. Its body wasn't strong. It had the toughness of a half-deified, but not the attack power. It couldn't even fly. In space it could float, but on land it could only crawl. Han Sen saw it climb over to the edge of the table. Then it fell off. Han Sen caught the little creature in his hand. The moment Han Sen touched the God Spirit touch, he felt its will enter his brain. His mind was full of messages that begged him. It wasn't a language, just an overwhelming sense of desire. Han Sen was able to understand it was begging. I beg you, help me evolve. That was what it meant. The little creature's mind was full of sincere begging. How can I help you evolve? You want more of my blood? Han Sen wondered aloud. He didn't know how to help the God Spirit touch exactly. I beg you, help me evolve. The God Spirit touch kept sending him this message. It looks like this guy isn't so smart after all, Han Sen thought. But Han Sen realized it might not have wanted blood. There were still traces of blood on the tip of Han Sen's finger. But the God Spirit touch wasn't interested in it. It kept sending its pleading message. If it doesn't want my blood, then the only way I can help it is with my Blood Pulse Sutra. But my body has yet to recover. I don't have much energy, and so, my Blood Pulse Sutra is weaker than usual. I don't know if it will work on him, Han Sen thought to himself. He cast his Blood Pulse Sutra. He made his self-cogwheel connect with the God Spirit touch's self-cogwheel. And then they spun. Han Sen wanted to see what the God Spirit touch wanted. Before, when Han Sen used his Blood Pulse Sutra, it was difficult. Whether he was using it on Lando, Bar, or Gu Qingqing and Elysian Moon, it had cost Han Sen all his strength to push their cogwheels. But this time, Han Sen only had to use a small amount of power to push the self-cogwheel of the God Spirit touch. It spun quickly. Chapter 2604 Making a Butterfly, by hand. The people of Sky Palace could see the God Spirit touch on Han Sen's hand. Then a red light manifested in Han Sen's palm. It was then that they realized what was going on. There it is. There it is. Here it comes again. It must be that thing. You know what I'm talking about. You just surely. It can't be that thing that got Brother Han the title of God's daddy. I bet you it is. Did you know that I watched him bless Bar? What I'm seeing here is that exact same red light. What is this all about then? Isn't the beetle supposed to be testing Brother Han's talent? Why is Brother Han helping the God Spirit touch evolve instead? Maybe they're no longer testing. Brother Han's 11 armor talent is so strong. Did you not see the God Spirit touch crawl over to Han Sen? Perhaps it's requesting his aid. I must confess that this really is starting to become an interesting turn of events, to say the least. Exquisite and Bishi felt an odd swirl of emotions within their chests. They had heard the tales of Han Sen blessing Lando and Bar, but they thought there must have been some sort of trick to the whole thing. There was no way Lando and Bar became deified because of his power. But the God Spirit touch belonged to Bishi, and he knew a lot about the little creature. He knew the God Spirit touch would never become deified. So he was conflicted and confused when he saw what Han Sen was aspiring to do. Everyone was watching the God Spirit touch in Han Sen's hand. It was covered by a small red light. The crystalline body started to glow. All of the red light rose from the God Spirit touch's body, and its oval body grew smaller. The God Spirit touch had lived for God knew how long. The Very High had taken it in so it could repeatedly test people. It had absorbed the genes of many creatures, and the blood it had consumed featured many 9 armor talents across the years. And all it had been given was for free. Although the God Spirit touch couldn't properly absorb the genes in the blood, it had received many benefits. With the amount of resources it had received, it should have become deified a long time ago. But its talents were limited, and it couldn't break through the last stage. It stopped at half deified. Right now, it was breaking through like the wall was nothing more than paper. And it was all attributed to Han Sen's Blood Pulse Sutra. The God Spirit touch was now becoming deified. Its genes no longer limited it anymore. Han Sen had only cast a small amount of his Blood Pulse Sutra to lightly push the self-cogwheel. Everyone looked at Han Sen, holding the God Spirit touch. And then a light appeared out of the God Spirit touch. It was such a small bug, but the light from its body reached all the way up into space. It lit up the whole system, and deifieds throughout the system turned to look in that direction. Catcha. Amidst the light, as the bug's body became smaller, cracks started to form. A small crystal claw emerged. And then another crystal claw came into view. And then a body. Through the shining light, onlookers could barely make out a crystal butterfly starting to emerge. It flapped its wings and happily danced around Han's senator. When the crystal butterfly flapped its wings, its light became clearer. Its substance chains became visible. The substance chains formed together into a giant butterfly wing. It lit up the whole of Sky Palace. Everyone was shocked. Before, they thought this was awesome because they had seen it on video. Seeing what happened through a screen hadn't left a terribly deep impression on them though. But now, they were seeing a creature become deified right in Han Sen's hands. His hands were like the hands of a god. They had an unlimited amount of power. And they were full of magic. He could turn even trash into the working of a miracle. It was difficult to believe. As they watched Han Sen hold the deified crystal butterfly gracefully in his hands, it was like he was the creator of God. It really became deified. Bishi and Exquisite were more shocked than the others. They had doubted Han Sen's blessing powers before. But now, he had lackadaisically made Bishi's god spirit touch deified. This power was more than Bishi and Exquisite knew what to do with. Even the very high elders couldn't accomplish something like this. The god spirit touch had just become a crystal butterfly, and it was now flying merrily around Han Sen's hands. It flew around Han Sen 3 times. And then, it suddenly flapped its crystal wings and disappeared. It just vanished all of a sudden. Everyone was frozen, and they all looked at Bishi. They thought Bishi had returned it. But Bishi was frozen too. His coldness and calmness were now all gone. He looked at Han Sen, his expression rigid. It looked as if he was wondering where the god spirit touch had gone. Catcha. Bishi's face changed. He felt as if something in his pocket had just snapped. He felt bad. He quickly reached into his pocket. The spell that had the god spirit touch's symbol was now broken. The very high used a secret skill to tame the god spirit touch. That spell was the key to its control. It was like a leash for the creature. As long as the spell was there, he could control the god spirit touch, and the creature couldn't disobey. If the master desired it, the god spirit touch would suffer pain that would make the creature wish it was dead. When the god spirit touch became deified, Bishi hadn't immediately seen the problem. Now that the spell was broken, he realized what had happened. His stomach sank. No god spirit touch had become deified before this. The very high secret skill was only used on creatures that were half deified or below. The god spirit touch was a creature that was easy to control. But now that it had become deified, it destroyed the secret skill. It became free and ran off. The god spirit touch wasn't a top-class xenogenic, but it was very rare. Most of them were given out by very high parents. If Bishi lost it, he couldn't get it back. Mr. Bishi, did you put your god spirit touch away? Han Sen looked at Bishi. The question was irrelevant though. Judging from the perplexed look on Bishi's face, Han Sen knew that he hadn't. He knew that the god spirit touch had actually escaped. He couldn't openly admit it had run away though. Bishi might try to hold him responsible for what had happened. Bishi frowned. He didn't blame Han Sen for letting the god spirit touch escape. He only coldly said, "The god spirit touch became deified when it transformed into a butterfly. It broke my restraints and ran." The Sky Palace students, upon hearing that the god spirit touch had become deified right from Bishi's mouth, believed it now. It looks like the legends concerning you are true. Brother Han really can bless others. Well duh. Of course he can. Why else would you think Brother Han was labeled God's daddy? This is too awesome. He is a king class that can produce xenogenic deifieds. That is better than what most deifieds themselves can do. The Sky Palace students discussed all this happily. They felt very hopeful. If Han Sen stayed in Sky Palace, perhaps Han Sen would be willing to bless them sometime. Many of the Sky Palace elites that saw this were feeling flat out strange. It had been a bewildering thing to witness after all. But many disregarded their confusion to simply revel in the result. And the results made them more than happy. Still, more than anything, there was one emotion they couldn't deny. and that emotion was worry. Other races would take Han Sen's abilities very seriously after seeing this. Sky Palace would no longer be a mellow place. There were the Extreme King first of all. They no longer had a good relationship with Sky Palace. That being said, Sky Palace wasn't afraid of them. But now, the Very High had seen Han Sen's power in person. It was difficult to tell whether they would want to do something with Han Sen or not. Chapter 2605 Swap. The meeting ended quickly. The story of Han Sen making a butterfly in the palms of his hands spread across all of Sky Palace. The Sky Palace students were delighted by the result. When they were alone, Bishi and Exquisite discussed what had happened. Bishi frowned and asked her, "You want to make Han Sen your silkworm?" Exquisite nodded and said, "If Lone Bamboo isn't willing to join the Very High, there is no point in forcing him to. I should use this opportunity to take Han Sen with me." Bishi frowned even more. "Have you thought this through? Han Sen looks very talented, but I don't think things are as simple as they seem with him. Perhaps he has practiced a special and unique Geno art that allowed him to access and activate the God Spirit Touch's gene potential and make the God Spirit Touch become deified. That might have been why he was able to make the butterfly and create the illusion of having an 11 armor talent. Perhaps that isn't his true talent. You should know that crystallizers can't have a gene talent that high." Exquisite sighed and said, "It is impossible. 11 armor talents exist only in legends. Han Sen isn't bad, but I know he can't reach those mythical heights. But still, there must be a reason for what transpired. In addition, I have seen for myself that Han Sen is talented, and the Geno art he uses can make other creatures evolve. And that is impressive on its own. This power he has is very rare. Even if his talent was ordinary, I would be willing to make him my silkworm, so I could study that Geno art of his. Plus, there is the chance he still has excellent talent." Upon hearing this, Bishi didn't deny the possibility. He said, "You are right. That power is so mysterious. Even our race doesn't have a Geno art that could accomplish what Han Sen had done. That miraculous Geno art is more than enough reason for you to take him on as your silkworm. Since you agree, can you please bring this subject up for discussion when we talk to Sky Palace tomorrow?" Exquisite said. Bishi nodded and said, "But before that, I need to go and test Han Senator. I need to see his true power." Exquisite didn't object to this. There were many stories surrounding Han Sen, but she had never witnessed his abilities directly. She wouldn't place her faith in Han Sen's skills until she saw them firsthand. Han Sen's wounds have yet to heal. I don't think we should fight him. But if we don't, how else should we test him? Exquisite asked. "I have a way," Bishi said without explaining. Han Sen returned to his little jade island to heal. Fortunately, the leader of Sky Palace forbade others from entering the island and disturbing him. If people had been allowed to go and see him after what had just happened, he wouldn't have had a single second of reprieve. Han Sen had used his hands to produce a butterfly. That boosted Han Sen's reputation to a whole new level. Although Han Sen wasn't related to the people of Sky Palace by blood, his reputation was one of the best of that whole generation. He was on par with Yu Shanshin and Lone Bamboo. When the story of Han Sen using his hands to produce a butterfly reached Narrow Moon, many of the rebate stunned at the news. Some of the rebate hadn't liked it when Isha decided to move Narrow Moon, but now they were starting to change their minds. They didn't hate the concept of moving anymore. Han Sen is Knife Queen's only student. Knife Queen offended the Extreme King on his behalf and moved Narrow Moon next to Sky Palace. So Han Sen is with us. In the future, Han Sen will work for the rebate. He will bless us. Perhaps we will have a chance to rise as well. Many of the rebate were thinking along these lines. After all this happened, a lot of the pressure that the rebate had been putting on Isha abruptly fell away. The kings that had always been against her had changed their minds. They kept mentioning the idea of bringing Han Sen over to bless them. Isha pretended not to hear those constant whisperings. She had seen Han Sen's blessing, and she knew it was something amazing. But Isha didn't think that power could turn a dumpster fire into a deified. From what Isha had seen, the people that were blessed by Han Sen were already quite close to becoming deified. For someone who already didn't have a chance of becoming deified, it wouldn't make a difference no matter how many blessings were bestowed. Isha knew that Han's son wouldn't turn her down if she made a request, so she didn't ask just yet. It wasn't like she was too full of pride to ask for the help of her student. There was simply no one in the rebate that was suitable for the blessing. The rebate were considered a higher race, but their ranking was still low on that generous leaderboard. They had depended on the support of the Jade Toad and the Extreme King to become a higher race. Now that she was deified, she was the biggest supporter the rebate had. She was the only being of her level within the rebate. The only rebate close to being deified was Moonwheel King, but he was old, and his lifespan had almost reached its end. It was unknown if he could become a deified after receiving a blessing. Even if he did though, he wouldn't live long enough to do much for the rebate. Isha couldn't stop thinking about the fact that the rebate had no one special like Lando or Bar. It was giving her a headache. As Isha continued working, Bauer ran into the hall and leaped into her chest. "Big Sister Queen. Bauer, why are you here?" Isha stroked Bauer's head and smiled. Bauer used to live in the palace with Isha. Isha had liked her a lot and spoiled her quite a bit. "Daddy brought me here," Bauer said with a smile. Isha looked ahead and saw Han's son being led forward by a rebate guard. He was brought into the hall. She told the guard straight away, "Let him in." "My queen," Han's son said with a bow. Isha looked at Han's son and observed how weak and frail his body had become. She said, "Why aren't you resting on the little Jade Island? You shouldn't be running around in this shape." Han's son knew Isha was referring to the fact that he had just blessed the god spirit touch. He smiled and said, "I was just going to listen to the very high explain Geno arts. I was pushed to the stage to do something against my will." After that, Han's son went on to say, "My body hasn't recovered yet. It will probably take a whole year. Maybe my queen can pick 2 or 3 people from the rebate for me, and I will find the time to bless them. It will help you all. If they aren't talented enough to become deified, they can still be made considerably stronger." Isha was very pleased. Han's son had mentioned this without being asked to. She believed she had made the right decision. It is a shame there are no psychics here that can calculate the location of people. It is impossible to find Dollar now, Isha thought to herself. She still hadn't let her grudge against Dollar go. She wasn't really looking for Dollar because of her grudge though. Isha wanted to get the rebate Alpha's scabbard back. Chapter 2606 Very Sky Family Han's son had just returned to his little Jade Island when Thousand Feather Crane and the Yin sisters dropped by. Han's son frowned. For his safety, the leader of Sky Palace had issued a decree forbidding students of Sky Palace from approaching the little Jade Island. If his 3 friends had been allowed to visit, it meant they must have received approval from a Sky Palace supervisor. As expected, they brought good news alongside a serving of bad news. The good news was that Lone Bamboo was doing fine. He was going to be released soon. The bad news was that Exquisite of the Very High had selected Han's senator, so Lone Bamboo didn't need to go to the Very High anymore. Han's son would have to go and be with the Very High in his stead. "Sky Palace leader wanted us to tell you," Yin Sushang said. "If you don't want to go to the Very High, we will still find a way for you to stay here. If you don't want to go, you don't have to push yourself." When Han's son heard this, he felt a bit better. He didn't want to go to the Very High, no matter how many benefits and goodies he might receive. He had too many secrets, and so he couldn't allow Exquisite to pry open his mind and examine all his thoughts. He was more scared than Lone Bamboo of being naked and having his secrets leaked. "Sky Palace leader wants you to visit him. There is something he needs to tell you face to face," Thousand Feather Crane said. Han's son nodded. He followed Thousand Feather Crane to Sky Palace leader's house. The leader of Sky Palace didn't meet Han's son in the hall. They met in the garden. Thousand Feather Crane and the Yin sisters had to stop at the doorstep. Without the explicit command of Sky Palace leader, they were unable to enter. So, Han's son went through to the garden alone. He found Sky Palace leader there, sitting in a pavilion and drinking a cup of tea. He was looking at the pond that resided there. "Sit. This isn't an office, and I'm not talking to you as the leader of Sky Palace today. You are Isha's student, and I am her teacher. I suppose that makes you my half-student too. Let's chat. The Sky Palace leader pointed to a place near him. Han-sun sat down and made himself comfortable. He asked, "You want me here to talk about the very high?" The Sky Palace leader didn't deny this. He nodded. "Do you want me to go or not?" Han-sun asked. The leader of Sky Palace didn't answer. He took a sip of his tea and said, "We have an agreement with the very high. We cannot refuse to hand over the people they select. Anyone they select must serve them for 4 years. Over the years, many Sky Palace students have gone with the very high. Most of them returned safely, with a lot of benefits and a deified status. But if I had the power to prevent it, I wouldn't allow any student of Sky Palace to be taken by the very high." After pausing, the Sky Palace leader said, "I believe you have heard about the very high from Lone Bamboo. I'm not going to lie. Because many students have gone to the very high over the years, Sky Palace has no secrets from the very high. They even know about our secret skill textless book. In that case, why don't you refuse their requests?" Han-sun asked. He knew Sky Palace must have had its reasons, and he wanted to know what they were. Sky Palace leader sighed and said, "Have you noticed that the sky looked like the very high?" "You mean?" Han-sun's brow furrowed. It looked as if he had come to some sort of realization, but he still didn't understand. The sky and the very high were the same race in ancient times, but there were brothers that had different opinions, Sky Palace leader explained. They split up, and their descendants became the sky and the very high. Textless book and the very high sense are quite similar because of this. Han-sun opened his mouth wide in awe. He had thought liqueur and exquisite were sky, at first. He thought the very high had skills like the foxes, and could change their appearance. Now he knew that in reality, liqueur and exquisite practically counted as sky. The Sky Palace leader continued, "Because they have 3 eyes and they are very powerful. The very high were the strongest in the universe in ancient times. Although they weren't as strong as they are now, they could travel between systems. It was pretty awesome back then. But the very high reproduced very slowly. Their children were few and far between, and the race couldn't expand. At their most populated, they only had a few hundred people. Then one day, triplet brothers were born, and a lot of changes took place within the very high. The 3 brothers were very talented. They became pillars for the very high. The oldest one became the leader of the very high. The second and third brothers became elders. The 3 of them worked together to spread the influence of the very high. The very high became the leaders of all races. They controlled the whole universe. However, population growth remained a problem for the very high. Although they had many systems, they only had 1 or 200 people. They had more power than any other group in the universe. But merely holding on to a few systems was hard. So the 3 brothers began to fight. The second brother out of the 3 wanted to breed with other races, to increase the population of the very high. The eldest brother wanted to keep the blood of the very high pure. The third one was neutral, and believed both plans could work. The 3 of them were very smart, but none of them could convince each other. The third brother remained uninvested in the arguments, but the conflicts of the first and second brothers became worse and worse. The second brother wasn't a leader, so he couldn't do what he wanted. Instead, he rallied a few others to his cause and departed. They created what you now know as the sky, and nowadays we have Sky Palace. The mixed blood increased the ability of breeding, but it also made the genes of the sky unstable. Our gene talents are shakier. After all these years of mixed blood, most of the sky's gene talents aren't as good as the very highs. But every now and again, they're one of the sky with greater genes. Their gene talents can be even better than those of the very high. Speaking of this, Sky Palace leader sighed and said, "But our origins still lie in the very high. Their blood still courses through our veins. When the sky are in danger, the very high always lend aid and ensure our safety." So back then the sky leader forged an agreement with the leader of the very high. It isn't something we should go against. My people are in our current position of safety and security, thanks to the efforts of the very high. We should pay them back. It isn't too much to ask. Are you saying you want me to go with the very high? Han-sun asked. The Sky Palace leader shook his head. It is entirely up to you. I'm just telling you the pros and cons. If you go, I will ensure your safety, for as long as I am here, and if you don't commit a crime of murder, I can protect you from any harm. So don't worry about that. Plus, there are some treasures in the belongings of the Very High that can help you with your wounds. If you go there, it won't take 3 years to heal. You will be healed in a short amount of time. Of course, if you don't go, it will be great for Sky Palace too. You can stay here while I deal with the Very High. Han Sun was very touched. He knew the Sky Palace leader wanted him to go, but Han Sun didn't want to go. He couldn't allow anyone else to access his secrets. Otherwise, it could be disastrous for the sanctuaries and humans. Chapter 2607 Decision Sky Palace leader allowed Han Sun to go home and think the matter over. He could inform the leader, once he had come to a decision, if I go, it will save me 3 years of healing. I will also be given the support of the Very High. It is a great deal, but I will risk exposing my true identity. If I don't go, nothing bad will happen, but it will take me some time to heal. And while I'm healing, there won't be much I can do to further myself. My ability to practice will be suspended, and I will have to locate my own resources. Han Sun was deep in thought the whole way home, wondering what he should do. After a while of deliberation, he decided to stay in Sky Palace. His recovery would only take a short time anyway, and he could get his own resources. It would just be a slower process, but if his identity was exposed, that would be very bad. It would affect the safety of the entire human race. When Han Sun returned to the little Jade Island, Lone Bamboo was there waiting for him. The man didn't look to be in poor condition. There was no sign in his countenance that he had just been released from prison. I'm going to the Very High, was the first thing Lone Bamboo said. And that surprised Han Sr. Why the sudden change of heart? Han Sun asked Lone Bamboo with confusion. Lone Bamboo had been adamant about not going, and he had claimed that he would rather remain in prison. Now he was free, and he had changed his mind. I don't want to go, but I can't make you go in my stead. The way the situation stands, I have to go, Lone Bamboo said. Sky Palace leader said he can figure this out. Perhaps there is a way in which neither of us has to go, Han Sun said. Lone Bamboo shook his head. There is no other way. We have to send someone, and that person is either you, me, or another Sky Palace student. So I have decided that I will be the one to go to the Very High. Are you going to use Uncle Yu Shanshin's extreme evil path? Han Sun asked with curiosity. Lone Bamboo wasn't an easy person to sway. Han Sun was certain that Yu Shanshin would have offered his protection from the beginning. If Lone Bamboo wanted to choose this path, he could have from the beginning. Lone Bamboo shook his head again. Using the extreme evil path can avoid the prying eyes of the Very High, but it gives the user an evil mind. Evil will be watching you instead. You will still be watched, so it makes no difference. Now Han Sun understood. Yu Shanshin deliberately left out the most important part. Then what are you planning to do? Han Sun asked quietly. Lone Bamboo quietly looked out across the clouds, and he said, the Very High can feel everything I feel. So, all I must do is not think or feel anything. I will only do what they want me to do. Then, Exquisite will only see what I want her to see. That will be a very difficult thing. Han Sun knew how hard that task would be. There were many ways to control someone, but controlling yourself was harder. The most dangerous enemy a person had was always themselves. So Han Sun really admired Ningyu. He had used a parasite beast's soul to watch Ningyu once before, and Ningyu spent years practicing Buddhism. Han Sun was unable to glean any smidgen of information from Ningyu. Han Sun didn't think he had that sort of patience. Lone Bamboo was planning the same. He was going to use his power to control everything about his situation. He wasn't going to allow Exquisite to see all of his secrets. Although Han Sun knew Lone Bamboo was doing this because he didn't want Han Sun to be his replacement, there was nothing much he could say about it. If he was alone, he would make the same decision as Lone Bamboo. He wouldn't mind fighting his inner demons. But Han Sun had too much on the line. He was responsible for the countless lives in the sanctuaries. If his mind's fortitude failed, Exquisite would learn everything. He wouldn't only be hurting himself then. So, Han Sun couldn't afford to take that chance. Before I go, there is something I would like you to do, Lone Bamboo said softly. This was the reason he was there. What is it? Han-sen asked. Help me take care of a child. Her name is Flower, Lone Bamboo said. Is it a Sky Palace student? Is she related to you? Han-sen asked with curiosity. Lone Bamboo shook his head. He thought for a moment, and then answered. Her and Purple Eye Butterfly exist together. After I combined with the genes of Purple Eye Butterfly, she became a part of me. She keeps wanting to kill me to avenge the death of Purple Eye Butterfly. It might be a little annoying. So after I go to the very high, please take care of her. That sounds a bit tricky, but don't worry. If you want her to live, I will take care of her. Han-sen agreed to do this. That is great. Lone Bamboo sighed. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. To other people, it was hard to imagine why Lone Bamboo would care so much about someone who wanted to kill him. But Han-sen could understand. So he didn't ask anything more about it. Instead, he just asked for more information concerning the girl Flower. When Lone Bamboo took his leave, Han-sen felt something clench in his chest. He wished he could be like Lone Bamboo. He wouldn't mind going with the very high, as it was just a battle of the mind. Ningyu could do it and Lone Bamboo dared to. Could Han-sen not do it as well? But then he thought about all the trouble he could bring down on the sanctuaries. Han-sen smiled wryly and shook his head to clear away the errant thoughts. Han-sen thought that the matter had been resolved, but then something happened that Han-sen and Lone Bamboo hadn't foreseen. Exquisite now refused to take Lone Bamboo with her. She was only interested in taking Han-sen, and no other would be considered. That made Han-sen freeze. When he realized what was going on, he wanted to slap himself in the face. I shouldn't have gone to that meeting. Even if I went, why did I have to test my talent for all of them to see? And even if I took the test, why did I then go on to help the God Spirit Touch evolve? That was just asking for trouble. Han-sen cringed at his own stupidity, but no one had expected the very high to be so willing to change who they wanted. Han-sen should have been an outsider in these matters, but somehow, he had become the crux of it all. If Han-sen knew this would happen, he would have stayed home and played games. He wouldn't have attended the meeting. I had it coming. Han-sen sighed. Han-sen, what do you think? As Han-sen was going to visit Sky Palace leader, a smiling Yu Shanshin appeared next to him. I'm going to the very high, Han-sen said emotionlessly. Do you need me to use extreme evil path? Yu Shanshin asked with a smile. Uncle Yu, you didn't tell me that the demon would spy on me as well, Han-sen said with a smile. Letting me see things is better than others seeing things. We are a family. It's fine, Yu Shanshin said with a smile. Han-sen rolled his eyes and didn't bother responding. He and Yu Shanshin were on their way to the office. He had decided to go to the very high. If he didn't, things would likely end poorly. Plus, Han-sen had found a way to fight against the spying of the very high. Chapter 2608 Fighting in the Pond Leader. I have been thinking about it. I'm willing to go to the very high. But before that, I would like to speak with Exquisite alone. Han-sen went to see Sky Palace leader and started explaining the reason for his visit. What do you want to say to her? Sky Palace leader squinted his eyes in the direction of Han Senator. He knew Han-sen and Lone Bamboo were the same. Convincing men like them of anything wasn't easy. I would like to discuss the terms and conditions of me accompanying the very high. I'm an 11 armor talent genius after all. It's okay for me to strike a bargain that will suit me, right? Han-sen laughed. Tell me what you need. There is a team in Sky Palace that can fight for the best terms and conditions to benefit you. Sky Palace leader didn't believe that Han-sen just wanted a better deal. There is one aspect of the deal that needs to remain private. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. I won't do anything that will cause you trouble, Han-sen said seriously. Fine, go home for now, and I will establish a private meeting for you. After Sky Palace leader said that, he allowed his eyes to linger on Han-sen for a while. And then he said, if you really don't want to go though, you don't have to. I can deal with the very high. It's okay. I have decided to go. I thought about it some more, and I figure that it isn't a bad deal. It will take 1.5 years for me to recover. If I go there, I can save at least a year. And I will be given lots of goodies. So why not? Han Sun laughed. After Han Sun left, Sky Palace leader looked at Yu Shanshin and asked, "Do you think he is really going to go to the very high?" Yu Shanshin bowed. "Leader, I cannot guess how Han Sen's mind works. But I don't think he is a liar. I don't think he will crap all over Sky Palace, given how we have treated him. And I don't think he means us harm." I thought that too. But this little guy does cause us a lot of trouble. He's kind of annoying, Sky Palace leader said as he rubbed his temples. Who isn't annoying when they are young? Yu Shanshin said with a smile. You are right. You should go and get ready yourself. After reaching the very high, your safety comes first. Do what you can, and don't push yourself further than that, Sky Palace leader said. Understood. Yu Shanshin bowed. Han Sun arrived back on his little jade island, and a Sky Palace butler came to see him shortly after. The man told Han Sun that Exquisite was going to meet him at the Skywater House that night. Han Sun followed the butler to the Skywater House. Exquisite was there, as expected. She was sitting atop a staircase that led down into a pond. Her feet were in the water, displaying the pale skin of her legs. Tell me what you want. Do you want xenogenic genes, treasures, or genoarts? Exquisite asked, her expression unreadable. On her face, not a single human-like emotion was visible. I don't want any of those things, Han Sun said to her. Sitting down next to the pool, he took off his shoes and rolled up his pants. Just like Exquisite, he allowed his legs to dangle in the water. A cooling sensation rushed against his feet, prompting Han Sun to shiver in pleasure. It was like eating ice cream in the summer. The water in Skywater House wasn't ordinary water. It was blue water, and it was filled with energy. It was able to quicken the growth of cells and aid in the rejuvenation of one's body. What do you want then? Exquisite looked curiously at Han Sun, who was sitting next to her. Exquisite had given up on Lone Bamboo and selected Han Senator aside from Han Sen's talent and power. The most important motivator was the fact that Li Kier had chosen Dollar. Dollar had once beaten Lone Bamboo in the Geno Being Scroll, and Exquisite and Li Kier had both seen Dollar's power. If she chose Lone Bamboo, he would always be compared to Dollar. That wouldn't be much better. Li Kier had a 10 armor talent. Exquisite had a 9 armor talent. So Exquisite didn't want a silkworm that was inferior to Li Kier's. That was why she was taking a risk by going for Han Senator. If Han Sun really had an 11 armor talent, then her silkworm would be better than Li Kier's. If Han Sen's talent wasn't great, she would only lose once. But this way, at least she would have a chance to win. Han Sun looked at Exquisite. After a while he laughed and said, You can use me, but you need to be better than me. Why would I follow someone who is inferior to me? Don't you think there is sound logic to that thought? Of course, Exquisite said. She wasn't angry. If you think this is right, then it is settled. If you can convince me, I will follow you to the very high. If you cannot, can you leave me in Sky Palace alone? Han Sun said. Sure. Exquisite answered with haste. She sounded very confident. Han Sun looked at Exquisite with interest. How are you going to convince me? Exquisite looked at Han Sun calmly and asked, What is your best genoart? Knife skills, I guess. When Han Sun was Han Sun, he used knives the most. Then let us compete with our knife skills. Exquisite reached out her hand. A stream of water rose into her palm in a serpentine swirl, then formed itself into a knife. I will sit here, and you can attack me. If you can make me stand up in 100 attacks, you win. Exquisite was very confident, which was evident in the way she had chosen to fight with a water knife. She hadn't even stood up. Han Sun smiled. He reached out a hand toward the pond. He sucked up some of the water to form a water knife of his own. Sure. 100 attacks is the limit. Let us see who stands up first. Han Sun said to Exquisite with a smile. Please go ahead, Exquisite said without argument. In my home, ladies always go first. After you. Han Sun wanted to see Exquisite's real power. Han Sun had traveled with Li Kier and Exquisite for a long while, but he was never able to accurately gauge their real power. Sure, Exquisite answered. She didn't hesitate to attack Han Sun with the water knife. She didn't apply much strength, so the knife didn't make much sound as it slid through the air. But even so, Han Sen felt a chill at the sight. Her knife was coming for his head. Her hand appeared to be moving in a smooth arc, but Han Sen felt as if he couldn't see where the knife was coming from. It was as if the water knife adhered to the rules of some strangely shifting space. Good knife skill, Han Sen complimented her. He swung his own water knife, using teeth knife's fong. Chapter 2609 Exquisite's Third Eye Pang. Two water knives collided and exploded, becoming like a rainy squall scattering over the surface of the pond. Exquisite frowned. Her knife skill was from a race that was now extinct. Its name was Twist and Turn. It was a knife skill that could twist space. The skill made it nearly impossible to follow the course of the knife. Exquisite knew that when Teeth Knife reached its height, it could break through the fabric of space. But that didn't mean Teeth Knife could go against Twist and Turn. Unless, of course, Han Sen could somehow follow the course of her blade. Exquisite reformed her water knife and used Twist and Turn again. The shadow of the water knife twisted in the dimensions of space to take on a strange shape. Only masters of space could see the shadow of that knife. Anyone else would block the knife that they saw coming toward them. But that would be a decoy. They would block a shadow, while the real water knife would still be flying toward them. Han Sen didn't move. He waved his own water knife casually, blocking all of Exquisite's attacks. Exquisite attacked 10 times. And not a single one came down on Han Sr. He is definitely worthy of becoming my silkworm, Exquisite thought. She nodded. She enjoyed Han Sen's performance. Unless he had real power, Han Sen would be a poor silkworm. Silkworms had to be exceptionally talented and have a genuine drive for learning. The further they could go, the more use they would be to the very high on the whole. Now that she knew Han Sen had a potent mastery of knife skills, Exquisite wasn't going to hold back. She began to use all her skills, cycling through knife attacks one after another. Her very high knife skills combined with the knife skills of all the different races she knew. All her skills were a patchwork of knowledge gathered from across the universe. Although her attacks wouldn't be any stronger than the most famous knife skills in the universe, the rotation of skills she employed was quite unique. In the next 20 or 30 attacks, Han Sen felt as if he was fighting 20 or 30 different people at once. And it was like each swordsman was trained differently, and they were each an incredible fighter in their own special way. All of the styles employed came pouring out of his opponent with natural precision and exceptional talent. Even Han Sen found himself shocked by Exquisite's knife skills. An ordinary person that practiced a lot of knife skills would be limited by their personality and body. They had to follow one course. If someone had excellent agility, their knife skills would be very fast and flexible. If another person was very strong, their knife skills would be simple and violent. People that had no patience tended to attack quickly. But Exquisite's knife skills didn't resemble anything he had seen before. She was her own woman, and it was like her personality could change to perfectly accommodate whichever skill she used next. Not even Han Sen could do something like that. His knife skills followed his one true style. That was teeth knife. Han Sen's teeth knife was different from Isha's teeth knife. People that knew teeth knife didn't need to look at who used it. Merely by seeing the skill, they could tell who used it and how. Han Sen was shocked. He didn't know Exquisite was actually more shocked than he was. Her knife skills kept changing. And yet, no matter what technique she used, Han Sen was able to use teeth knife to block each strike. That wasn't because teeth knife itself was so strong. It was because Han Sen himself was too talented. It looks like the God Spirit touch was accurate. Maybe he really does have an 11 armor talent. Upon seeing Han Sen's knife skills, Exquisite felt deeply moved. She wanted to fetch another God Spirit touch to test Han Sen again. But she hadn't brought a God Spirit touch herself. If she wanted to conduct another test like that, she would have to visit the very high. Beating him will be difficult. I will have to use this. Exquisite's heart jumped. She closed her eyes. Han Sen was surprised when she closed her eyes. He didn't know what Exquisite was thinking. A 9th-tier king should be able to see fine, even with her eyes closed. But Han Sen knew there had to be a reason for what she had done. While Han Sen mulled over this conundrum, he saw the red mark on Exquisite's forehead open. A black and white eye appeared. The very high and sky were the same. It didn't surprise Han Sen that Exquisite had a third eye. Exquisite's third eye was different from the third eyes of the sky, however. The third eye of each sky was different depending on their elements and powers. Exquisite's third eye was a Tai Chi symbol. Her white and black eye was like a yin and yang fish. On the white part, there was a black dot. On the black part, there was a white dot. The yin and yang eye was spinning upon her forehead. When he gazed at it, Han Sen felt a sense of mystery within him. Like this eye possessed all the answers in the universe. When the Tai Chi eye opened, Exquisite's whole body started to change. Although Han Sen might have thought that Exquisite was just some snobby and cruel woman who cast disdain on the ordinary, he knew that her heart still had some humanity in it. But right now, Exquisite didn't look like a person. She looked like an emotionless machine. No, she was scarier than a machine. At this moment, Exquisite was like someone who had combined with the universe. A machine that was as cold and uncaring as space itself. Exquisite's movements felt like they were powered by the forces of nature. If a king body was like someone pushing their powers as far as they could go, an ancient god was power concentrated into a single creature, then Exquisite with her yin and yang Tai Chi eye was like the world's law and order. Han Sen used his Dongxian Sutra to observe her. He saw that Exquisite now looked like a universal cogwheel. She had become a part of the universe, a piece of machinery that was no longer a person. Han Sen frowned. His Dongxian Sutra could only allow him to see the universal cogwheel's connections. He couldn't become a cogwheel himself like Exquisite was doing. His skill was totally different. If the universe was a car, the Dongxian Sutra was like the person that was at the wheel. Now Exquisite was acting as if she was a part of the car. Han Sen didn't understand this. What Exquisite had done must be affecting her body. Strike! I will grant you 100 free attacks. Exquisite calmly said as she looked on Han Senator. If anyone else had said that, Han Sen would have thought it was a ruthless and arrogant taunt that dripped with pride. But hearing it from Exquisite's mouth, it was like the soulless voice of a machine. Everything she said sounded like she was merely stating a fact. Han Sen didn't mind though. He used his water knife to strike. And Exquisite, meanwhile, showed no intention of blocking. She sat near the pond, looking calmly at Han Senator. When Han Sen's attack reached Exquisite, the water in front of her became a knife to block Han Sen's water blade. Han Sen furrowed his eyebrows in a deep frown. He kept on striking, pushing his teeth knife to the max. It didn't matter how many times Han Sen attacked though. Exquisite's water knife was able to block each attempt. Exquisite gave Han Sen the feeling that this was supposed to happen, and the water knife was supposed to be there. It was an unavoidable rule. It didn't matter how many times Han Sen switched up his knife skill. He couldn't land a hit. Chapter 26:10 Cheating. Han Sen's knife skills kept changing, and thus far, he had used 70 different attacks. Not a single one managed to hit Exquisite. Her floating water knife was able to block every single strike. To an ordinary person, Exquisite would seem like some unknown god. No matter how many times Han Sen attacked, Exquisite controlled her water knife with perfect finesse. She blocked every attack like a prophet. But in Han Sen's eyes, Exquisite wasn't some omniscient being. Her reactions made sense. That was because Exquisite had merged with the universe. Han Sen's movements would trigger the spinning of universal cogwheels. And whenever this happened, the disturbance in the universe would alert Exquisite and prompt her to react. So when Han Sen attacked, Exquisite was able to respond instantaneously. It was like Han Sen was attacking a mirror. It didn't matter how he used his knife. When the water knife touched the mirror, the reflection of the water knife would react and nothing would happen. Han Sen stopped moving. He sat still. His water knife suddenly pushed forward, and a water silk appeared next to Exquisite. Almost 100 water silks manifested like a horde of blades around Exquisite's body. The Sky Palace skill called Under the Sky made every slash Han Sen had performed thus far into a water silk. They all appeared at once, and Han Sen was on the verge of breaking the enemy's defense. A water knife couldn't block that many knife silks unless Exquisite used her body to fight back. She either had to do that, or move her body to evade them. Of course, the water knife in front of Exquisite moved, but it exploded under the force of all those incoming water silks. The water silks were like a net of knives coming down on Exquisite. Exquisite, however, didn't move. She was like a jade goddess still seated atop the stairs. Her jade feet were still comfortably dangling in the water. Holy but cold. The knife net was only a few inches away from her by this point. And then it suddenly came to a standstill. Each silk froze in front of Exquisite, and there they remained unmoving. Exquisite reached out her finger to pull the knife net. And then, the knife net came undone like a water stream. They all folded in on each other, gathering in her hands. They merged to become a giant water knife. That water knife still contained Han Sen's power, but it was no longer under his control. Exquisite held onto it gently, cradling it like it was a delicate toy. Han Sen's eyes were electric. He stared at Exquisite's water knife. Han Sen used his Dongxian area to watch Exquisite's movement. She can play like this? Han Sen thought happily. Han Sen could see that Exquisite was able to mess with the cogwheels of the universe. His Dongxian area was more useful at this than her ability though. Han Sen felt as if he learned something. It is pointless to continue this futile effort. Let us end this exercise here, Exquisite said coldly. Her hands looked like they were touching a flower, as she flicked the handle of the water knife. Then, the water knife flew toward Han. Senator Han Sen wanted to generate another water knife to continue fighting, but he noticed that all the water in the pond was moving toward that big water knife that was headed for him. The water knife flew extremely slowly, but the closer it got, the more power it contained. Han Sen was forced to generate another water knife, but when he struck the giant water knife, he was unable to break it. Han Sen's water knife blended in with the giant water knife to become a part of that giant water knife. No wonder the Very High are the #1 race in the universe. She is good. Not many deifieds can manipulate the laws and rules of the universe to please their desires. And Exquisite is merely a 9th-tier king. Han Sen sighed. Han Sen had only complimented her slightly though. He wasn't planning on giving up. He watched as the water knife gathered all the water in the pond to itself. It was like a giant blade that had risen to cut the sky. Han Sen's eyes flashed and suddenly, he swung his hand like a blade. He used his body to fight back the knife. Exquisite had her yin and yang tai chi eye, but she was still surprised to see this. That giant water knife's power was combined with Han Sen's 70 strikes of Under the Sky, in addition to her own powers. It had been buffed by the universe itself too. That strike was starting to form substance chains. It wasn't like a real deified's attack, but it was better than what most half-deifieds could achieve. And Han Sen clearly intended to use his flesh to take the blow instead. Exquisite believed that was too dangerous to do, but Han Sen didn't hesitate. His handblade struck the water knife, and the scary water knife suddenly fell under Han Sen's control. It now followed Han Sen's attacking stance, returning toward Exquisite. Pang! The scary water power was now in front of Exquisite. An invisible wall rose to block it, then exploded and fell back to the pond. The explosion shook Exquisite, sending her stumbling backward. You cheated, Exquisite said, standing up. She looked at Han Sen's hand. In between his fingers was a crystal orb. It was Ancient Water God's Ancient God Origin. Ancient Water God's Ancient God Origin was a water element relic. If Han Sen held that item, not even water deifieds could harm him. And Exquisite was just a 9th-tier king. I wasn't cheating. I was just making reasonable use of my resources. If that is considered cheating, is it not cheating for you to use your third eye and receive the boons and benefits of the universe? Han Sen said, That is my power. What you used was another person's power, Exquisite said. With my power, I don't think I would lose either. But I'm heavily injured, so it wasn't as if you were challenging me at my full strength. Even if you won, I wouldn't concede, Han Sen said. When Exquisite heard that, she fell silent. She closed her Tai Chi eye and looked more like a person again. Although Exquisite's face was still rather expressionless, she looked far more like a human being than she had previously. With her third eye open, she was like a lifeless machine. Sure. I will wait until you heal so we can fight again then, Exquisite said while looking at Han Sr. Then you are going to have to wait a long time. My wounds will take at least a year to fix. Maybe 2 or 3 years. Han Sun laughed. Exquisite frowned. She knew that Han Sun was injured and his body was heavily damaged. She knew he wasn't lying. She was being too hard on him. Lady Exquisite, I have heard the Very High have a spring that brings good fortune. It can reverse one's luck and allow others to be reborn. Is that true? Han Sun squinted his eyes as he looked at her. Yes. Do you want to use that spring to repair your body? Exquisite knew what Han Sun was thinking. If you want to fight me again soon, I am afraid that is the only way, Han Sun said with a smile. If you don't want to come to the Very High, how can you use the spring to fix your body? Exquisite frowned. I didn't say I wouldn't go to the Very High. However, until you beat me, can I keep my body free from your intrusion? Han Sun finally spoke his true purpose. Chapter 26:11 Han Yin Beginner. You would be receiving benefits for nothing. I'm afraid that you're somehow collecting all the resources in this universe for free, Exquisite said unsympathetically. Han Sun shrugged his shoulders and laughed. If I go to the Very High, do you think I'm going to take the resources you offer and run? I'm not afraid of that. But your idea goes against the rules. It doesn't work the way you want it to. You can use the good fortune spring. But you agreed to obey me first, Exquisite said. In that case, never mind. I can take my time and heal slowly. You don't mind waiting a whole year, right? Han Sun said. I have all the time in the world. I will give you a year and a half. And then we will fight again. If you lose, there will be no further excuses. Not even the sky can protect you forever. I, Han Sun, am a reliable chap. Han Sun made sure that his expression looked as noble as possible. But he still thought the result was a bit of a shame. Taking advantage of the Very High wouldn't be as easy as he had anticipated. But that meant Han Sun could delay this annoyance for another year. His ability to buy so much time surprised him. Han Sun had thought that Exquisite wouldn't be able to wait a year. He was amazed she had so willingly agreed. When my body is healed, I will at least be more confident in the Very High. After Han Sun and Exquisite struck their deal, they left the Sky Water House. 2 days later, Bishi took Yu Shanshin and departed Sky Palace. Exquisite remained. She was going to live there for a year and a half in anticipation of Han Sun healing. Han Sun wasn't too concerned about Exquisite though. He continued to rest on his island every day, so that his body would heal as soon as possible. Sky Palace had been in talks with the Extreme King. Eventually, Bai Wuchang and the Extreme King Knights were released in exchange for resources. Some of them were xenogenic treasures designed to heal his body. They were all given to Han Senator. The Extreme King weren't willing to let go of their grudge. But now that Han Sun was in Sky Palace, there was nothing that they could do to him. In between the time he spent practicing in the White Jade Building, Han Sun savored the Extreme King's food. Han Sun had trained in the White Jade Jing before. There were 12 towers in 5 cities. In one of the towers, fairies would descend from paintings to grow a practitioner's power. Han Sun headed to the 7th White Jade Tower out of the 12. None of them were better than the others. They were all different. The 7th tower was called Hidden Skill Tower, because the jade wall there was full of skills. There was lots of knowledge to learn there. When the jade air was released each day, the jade wall would present a skill book. A different skill was displayed every day of the year. It was a cycle that repeated endlessly year after year. When a book appeared on the jade wall, merely looking at it would allow Han Sun to understand the hidden power residing inside. If he copied it and read it outside the tower, however, it would seem like nothing more than boring gibberish. According to legend, when the Alpha of the Sky created the textless book, he used the Very High sense and the skill books from the tower. Whether or not that was true was unknown. But the mere belief was enough of a testament to how special they were. Han Sen's body still hadn't recovered yet. He couldn't accept strong powers from the outside, so he couldn't go to the other towers to absorb their jade air. And neither could he go and refine the jade spirit. Instead, he focused on reading the books in that tower. Brother Han, I have heard you recommended your sister be accepted as a student in Sky Palace. Is she your real sister? Yun Sui asked with curiosity when the jade air was depleted, and the book on the jade wall disappeared. She had been studying behind him. Yes, she's my real sister. Han-sun nodded. He had asked Thousand Feather Crane to register her, because the man owed him a favor. She must be incredibly talented. If there is a chance, I would like her to study beneath my father, Yun Sui said. Han-sun was shocked. He looked at Yun Sui and asked, "Is that your idea or the Yin elders?" "Both. What do you think?" Yun Sui laughed. "If the Yin elder is willing to take on Han Yin, it will be very fortuitous for her. I would be immeasurably grateful," Han-sun said. Han Yin was just like him. They had both gone to Sky Palace on the recommendation of another. They were both foreigners who weren't native to there. Ordinarily, no foreign student would be taken on by an elder. If Yin Chongkong was willing to take her, though, it would be very beneficial for her. Having Sky Palace as a background would be much better for an ordinary foreign student. But Sky Palace still has its rules. Sister Han still has to walk the Sky Path to get to Sky Palace, Yun Sui said. Of course. Han-sun nodded. Han Yin should have no problem walking the Sky Path and the steps leading up to Sky Palace. If that's all agreeable to you, we should not delay. Let's go pick up Sister Han. My father has already completed the registration process. If she can walk to Sky Palace, she will be an official student of my father, Yun Sui said. Sui, thank you. Han-sun bowed before Yun Sui with sincerity. For a foreign student to have one of the 10 elders teach them was something most prestigious. Yun Sui must have worked hard to make that happen. Brother Han, what are you doing? I didn't help much. Yun Sui quickly stopped him from bowing. The two of them departed the White Jade Tower. Han-sun still rode his old legless crane. Together, they left the Xenogenic space and headed to Narrow Moon, where they would pick up Han Yen. Gu Qingqing and Elysian Moon were practicing outside. They weren't the type of people to spend their free time relaxing. With their powers, they could survive an attack from a low-level deified. There was no need to worry about them. Han Sen's sister was registering to join Sky Palace. This story remained on the headlines of Sky Palace for quite some time. After they went to Sky Palace, Han's son helped with the registration. With the help of the 10th elder Yin Chongkong, it was over quickly. It wasn't easy for a foreigner to become a student of Sky Palace. Without a considerable amount of power, it was a challenge to be accepted. Plus, Han Yin would have the 10th elder as a teacher. That was amazing, considering that she wasn't even one of the Sky. Yin Chongkong had gone to a lot of effort to ensure this would come to pass. Of course, the importance of Han's son to Sky Palace played a part in the proceedings. It would have been impossible, otherwise, for a foreign student to be brought into the fold by the 10th elder. Han Yin was so excited. She had grown very bored on Planet Eclipse, but now she could go to Sky Palace. It was what she had longed for. Yun Sui explained to her the things that she needed to be wary of in Sky Palace. She treated Han Yin like a real sister. When Han's son saw this, he felt touched. Bauer sat on the red cloud, flying in looping circles around Han. Senator Han's son had brought her there, and when Han Yin walked the sky path, he would ask Bauer to go with her. Bauer might be able to help out. The holy god's holy air was some good stuff, and there was a chance Han Yin would receive the same treatment. After Han's son brought Han Yin to Sky Palace, many of the Sky Palace elites turned their attention to her. Many people wanted to know how she stacked up next to Han Senator. Maybe Han's son was just a one-of-kind crystallizer. Or maybe the gene talents of all crystallizers were that good these days. Chapter 26:12 Han Yin walking Sky Path. Bauer, why don't you go with little auntie? Han's son asked Bauer, as they stood before the sky door. Sure. Bauer nodded and flew over to Han Yin. She took Han Yin's hand and smiled. Hey auntie, Bauer is going to walk with you. But before they went on to Sky Door Island, one of the Sky Guardsmen stopped their approach. He looked at Han's son and said, Brother Han, the leader issued a command that only Sister Han may traverse the sky path. Bauer cannot cross it again. Han's son was frustrated by that, but he couldn't actively go against a decree issued by Sky Palace leader himself. So Bauer returned to his side. Sky Palace leader was drinking tea at the time, and he murmured to himself, if the gourds rumble again, it will reduce the amount of holy air in the vine. If this happens again, the holy vine will be killed. Sky Palace leader had good reason to be protective of the vine. That plant was the root of Sky Palace, and it was used to vet and grow the students that the sky wished to train. If Bauer was allowed to cross Sky Path, every time Han's son brought someone to Sky Palace, the holy gourd vine's power would fall precipitously. If that happened repeatedly, the holy gourd vine would end up destroyed. Last time Bauer traversed Sky Path, she had received enough blessings for tens of thousands of average students. They had lost a lot that day, and Sky Palace couldn't afford another hit like that. That aside, the rules of Sky Palace only permitted one person to cross Sky Path at a time. Previously, Bauer had only been allowed to go with Han's son because she was so small. But that was why they lost as much as they did. Sky Palace leader wouldn't allow that to happen again. Exquisite watched the Sky Path from afar. She wanted to know how talented Han Sen's biological sister was. Perhaps she could learn more about Han Sen's real gene talent level. An 11 armor talent was too scary. It was difficult to believe that it was a genuine result. Brother, don't worry. I won't embarrass you. Han Yan's entire purpose in life was to catch up with Han Senator. She looked confident in this. Don't exhaust yourself. Just cross it. Han's son didn't want Han Yan to make a scene when she crossed the Sky Path. Making a name for yourself was never a good thing, he had discovered. Traversing the Sky Path wasn't that risky though. When she ascended the stairs that led to Sky Palace, that was when the opportunity to impress the sky would present itself. If Han Yan performed extremely well there, she could forget about having a quiet life. Han Yan didn't know what Han's son meant. She thought he was saying that to alleviate the pressure she might have been feeling. Sister Han, you can just stroll across. This is just a small crossing, Yun Sui said to comfort Han Yan. She didn't want her to be nervous. Thank you, Sister Yun. I'm going now. Han Yan walked through Sky Door Island. The people of Sky Palace watched her traverse the narrow Sky Path. Han Yan already knew that going across Sky Path might trigger the holy air of the gourds. So when she walked across the gourd vine, she stared down at the holy gourds. The holy gourds were big and small. They were each cute in their own way, but they showed no sign of activity. I have heard Sister Yun say that when Big Brother walked across Sky Path, he didn't receive the gift of holy air, but he made all the holy gourds shake and shiver. Why is nothing happening while I walk across it? Han Yan frowned. She continued to walk, and still, the holy gourds didn't so much as twitch. Of course, without Bauer there, that naughty kid, the crystallizer couldn't have triggered the trembling of 1,000 gourds. Han Yan had already walked halfway, and not a single gourd moved. Sky Palace leader merrily took another sip of his tea. He liked this. Brother Han's sister doesn't look like she has any special talents. Not a single gourd has chosen to bless her with holy air yet. In this world, only one Han is known as God's daddy. Not every Han of the crystallizer race can earn a title like that. It is useless to just be a Han. You should strive to become a God's daddy. It is a shame Bauer was stopped. If she was there, 1,000 gourds might move for Han Yan. Yun Chongkong was a bit disappointed. He had never seen Han Yan before, but still, he had agreed to take her on as a student. He made this decision because she was Han Sen's biological sister, and Yun Sui had asked him to multiple times. Yun Chongkong didn't expect Han Yan's power to be as great as her brother's, but since she was his real sister, he expected something more. He had high expectations, to say the least. Even if 1,000 gourds didn't move, she should have at least received some holy air. But right now, it didn't look as if any holy gourd was going to give her holy air. Although they are both called Han, this one is not Han Senator. Are you disappointed, Elder Yin? Elder 6 was smiling at Yun Chongkong as he spoke. Yun Chongkong had accepted a foreign student as his own. This was the first exception for an elder to take on someone foreign in Sky Palace. So, Yun Chongkong had a lot riding on this. Many people in Sky Palace were discussing these proceedings, and many whispers regarded Yun Chongkong's petty attempts to please Han Senator. It damaged Sky Palace leader's image. By extension, many weren't happy with what Yun Chongkong had done. Elder 6 had spoken in a mocking tone. Of course, it made sense that the other elders were feeling rather sour. Many elders in Sky Palace wanted to build a relationship with Han's son, but none of them were as close with him as those of the Yun family. When they heard that Yun Changkong had snatched Han Yin as a student, they didn't take the news well. Han Sen's blessing powers alone made many people want to befriend him, and that wasn't to mention his ownership of the charming god's Jian and the shield of the Medusa's gaze. Everyone wanted the best students possible, and if they had a few deophytes, their reputation would shift. How many deophytes did Sky Palace have? And how many could become primitive deophyte in the future? That rank alone was enough for someone to become famous. Exquisite had watched Han Yin walk over half of Sky Path, and not a single gourd had moved to provide her with something. This disappointed her immensely. Exquisite's knowledge of the gourds was that if a person had an 8 armor talent or above, quite a few holy gourds of the same element would give out holy air. She hadn't received any holy air though, and that meant her talent had to be below 8 armor. If Han Sen's sister had only ordinary talent, then it didn't matter how much the big brother mutated. There was no way he had an 11 armor talent. Seeing that Han Yin was just about to finish Sky Path with no result, Han Sen thought it was a shame that Bauer hadn't been allowed to join her. Han Yin didn't have a chance to absorb the holy air of 1,000 gourds. But this result didn't surprise Han's senator after all. No holy gourd had given him holy air when he walked it alone. It was only because Bauer was there the second time that he received something. She had been the reason that all the gourds released holy air for him. He had expected that the gourds might refuse to grant Han Yin anything. Han Yan's expression remained impassive. She walked all of the way to the end of Sky Path, ready to leave the holy gourds. But then Han Yin suddenly stopped. At the end of the holy vine, she looked back at the holy gourds on both sides. Chapter 26:13 Trying Han Yin looked at the holy gourds hanging behind her. She hadn't expected to be the recipient of the 1,000 holy airs that were bestowed upon Bauer, but it came as a surprise that not a single holy gourd had given her a holy air. It made her feel sick. I told my big brother that I wouldn't disappoint him, but I haven't even received a single holy gourd air. I have embarrassed my big brother. The people of Sky Palace will laugh at him. Han Yin looked at the gourds, trying to decide if she should do something more to prompt the activation of at least one gourd's holy air. Han Yin didn't feel this way because she didn't understand Han's son. It was because her living environment was different. Han's son had grown up with danger, and he had led a very rough and tumble life. He never really cared about how people perceived him. He valued his own safety and the benefits he earned for himself more than other people's opinions. But Han Yin was different. Han Yin had never suffered before. Even in the hardest times of the Han family, Han Yin had been doted on by Luolan. Luolan expected boys to take care of themselves, but she made sure to spoil her girls. So, Han's son and Han Yin's personalities were bound to be different. And when Han's son became famous, Han Yan's childhood became even more advantageous. When she went to school, she went to a royal school. Her performance there was exemplary, marking her as the best in the school. She was the smartest out of all the girls in her classes. Of course, Han Yin had earned that distinction through her own talent. Family support only played a small part. Han's son and Luolan had put a lot of effort into guiding Han Yin. And while she appreciated their efforts, it had put a lot of pressure on her. It made Han Yin feel that if she wasn't good enough, she would disappoint her big brother and mother after all the time they spent on her. So, Han Yin always worked as hard as possible to make herself the best could be. She wanted to be just like her brother. The more Han's son achieved, the more pressure Han Yin felt. Her workload increased, and so did her drive. Now, she had taken her first steps into Sky Palace without receiving a single holy gourd air. She felt at that moment that if she gave up without trying, she would be betraying the effort and expectations of Han's son and Luolan. Han's son had never felt that way about his sister though. Not for a single moment. More than anything, he wanted Han Yin to be happy. Her success didn't matter at all to him. Han's son felt the same way about all the members of his family. He only wanted them to be safe and happy. He hoped no disaster would befall them, and that they would be kind to the world in return. That was his wish. Han Yin seemed to think of something. She turned to face one of the holy vine's gourds and moved toward it. The nobles of Sky Palace looked at Han Yin strangely. They didn't know what she was planning to do at first, but to their horror, they soon understood. They saw Han Yin walk toward a gourd that was 20 centimeters tall. She grabbed it with both hands and tried to pull it down. Blurg! Sky Palace leader spat out the tea he was drinking. Amidst wheezy coughs he said, "What kind of family is this?" Bauer drained the holy vine. And now this Han Yin is rude enough to try and mug the gourds. Sky Palace didn't have a law that prohibited people from touching the holy gourds, but anyone with a brain knew that the holy gourd vine was a deified xenogenic plant. You couldn't gain the holy air by force. Unless the holy gourd was willing to give the holy air away, not even a deified elite could remove it by force. And Han Yin was just a duke. Han Yin's idea was simple. If there were no rules to keep her from touching the holy gourd, she at least wanted to try it and see if it worked. She wouldn't know unless she tried. She didn't want to disappoint Han Sun, so she had to give it a shot even if her chances of success were incredibly low. The Sky Palace students stared at Han Yin as she focused an intense gaze on the gourd in her hands. It looked as if she wanted to yank the gourd right off the vine. She really is a family member of Brother Han. She is brave. This is very creative. I like Sister Han, but she should give up. She is just a duke. If the gourd got mad, she wouldn't be able to endure its wrath. This woman is crazy. She wants to take a holy gourd with her. She is as brave as her big brother, but neither of them has a brain. What a shame. She has a lovely body. With her beauty and her relationship to Han Sun, she could have become a goddess in Sky Palace. Now, everyone knows that her brain is bad. She can't be a goddess. She will be recognized as a crazy woman for sure. Even Exquisite stared at Han Yin with a strained look on her face. She had never seen anything like this before either. The sixth elder was happy about this. He laughed out loud and was unable to control himself. He looked at Yin Changkong and said, "Elder Yin, my brother, congratulations. You have an excellent student. I have heard she is your exclusive student. It is good that you have this student. She won't let go of anything." Yin Changkong's wry smile had frozen on his face as he watched Han Yin move to clutch the holy gourd. The Han family, who are these people? Yin Changkong's mind had gone blank except for this small question. The dream beast was near a lake. He saw all this and his eyes smiled like a moon. Yin Suyi and Yin Susang, and all the others that were close with Han Sun, stood as still as statues. Sky Palace had a long history, and across those annals of time, very few had ever dared to try what Han Yin was doing. Han Yin didn't care about what others thought. She held on to that holy gourd and tried yanking it down. But the holy gourd was a deified xenogenic plant. It was a treasure of Sky Palace. Not even ordinary deifieds could harm it. Han Yin's strength was ant-like by comparison. It didn't matter how hard she tried, the gourd would not budge. Han Yin noticed she wasn't able to pull it down, but she refused to give up so easily. She used her super god body wanting to try her best. Even if it didn't work, at least she could say she tried. No regrets. Thousand Feather Crane cleared his throat. "Brother Han, it is almost time. Lead your sister to Sky Palace." He hoped Han Sun could convince Han Yin to stop yanking on the holy vine. He just didn't know how to tell her himself. Han Sun hadn't expected Han Yin to try something like this. He was as surprised as all the rest, but he still pretended to be calm. He said, "It is fine. It's good when young people come up with ideas like this. Let her carry on." Han Sun wouldn't undercut anything that Han Yin had decided to do. If the rules of Sky Palace didn't forbid her from trying to touch the holy gourd, then he certainly wouldn't stop her. As this happened, Han Yin's body changed. Her long black hair became a black crystal waterfall. It reached all the way down to her feet. Her eyes were like black gemstones. Her whole body swirled with a mysterious holy air. Chapter 26:14 Picking a holy gourd. Upon seeing this, many Sky Palace elites frowned. Although Sky Path wouldn't allow anyone to use their powers, provoking the holy vine like that wasn't a good thing. If Han Yin made the holy vine mad, it wouldn't go well for her. Sky Palace leader felt a headache coming on. Why must the Han family always be like this? Don't they have a decent leader to instill good behavior into them? This girl is going to be an enormous pain in the ass for old Tin. Yin Changkong's face was conflicted. Before today, he never thought that he would end up taking someone like this as his only student. He didn't know if he should cry or laugh at the sight. Sixth elder was laughing so hard, and he said, "This Han Yin is so interesting. Old Ten, you are going to be in a lot of trouble." Then the sixth elder's laughter stopped abruptly. He was still smiling, but his features seemed to have frozen in place. His eyes were wide. His face had changed expression so fast that laughter and shock occupied his expression at the same time. It made the sixth elder look very weird. Yin Changkong was about to reply to the sixth elder, but when he saw the other man's horrified expression, he spun back to look at the holy gourd. When his eyes found the holy gourd, Yin Changkong felt like his heart stopped. His eyes bulged slightly as he stared in disbelief. The two elders weren't the only ones who were shocked. The whole of Sky Palace had fallen quiet. A teacup hung forgotten from Sky Palace leader's fingers. He had been about to take a sip when his entire body grew still. His face looked as if he had laid eyes on a ghost. Han Yin still held the gourd in her hands. A thin stem had once connected the gourd to the vine, but now that stem was broken. Han Yin had managed to pick the gourd off the vine. The nobles of Sky Palace were shocked. They didn't believe what they were seeing. They had never dreamed that the gourds could be picked like this. Over the history of Sky Palace, a few people had attempted to pick a gourd from the vine. None of them had been ordinary students though, they were deified elites. And those deified elites hadn't merely been trying to obtain some holy air like Han Yin was. They wanted the vines and the gourds to craft deified treasures. It was impossible to tear a gourd loose by force. Even if the Sky Palace leader wanted a holy gourd, he needed to perform a special ritual and provide treasures that would provide energy to the holy vine. If the holy vine was in a good mood, it might give out a holy gourd. At that time, Sky Palace had 17 treasures made from holy gourds. They were all deified weapons. The most powerful holy gourd treasure was a scary butterfly-level weapon. Of course, some holy gourds had failed when the sky tried to shape them into weapons. They weren't included in this number. But everyone knew, regardless of all that the holy vine was a terrifying being. Even though Sky Palace had many deifieds, none of them would dare to mistreat it. Forcing a holy gourd off the vine had only been accomplished by 2 people in the entire history of Sky Palace. However, Han Yin was just a duke. She hadn't sacrificed anything in the vine's honor. She had just lackadaisically collected the gourd from the vine. It was very hard to believe. Everyone looked at Han Yin like she was insane. Han Yin was so happy, and she thought to herself, "It looks like you really can take a holy gourd from this vine. If the holy gourd has holy air, I must take it back with me to research. I won't be able to open the gourd now, but after I become stronger, I'll find a way to break open the gourd and collect the holy air within." Right. I have heard each person can only walk across Sky Path once. Let me get one for Big Brother, and another one for Bauer. Han Yin thought to herself. She put the gourd in her bag, and looked at the small gourds next to her. Han Yin was worried that if she tried to pick a gourd that was too big, she might not be able to collect it. So she took the small ones instead. What is she doing? Sky Palace leader stared at Han Yin with worried eyes. He felt terrible. He almost leaped out of his seat when he saw Han Yin reach for an additional gourd. As Han Yin reached out and picked another gourd off the vine, she said to herself, "One for Big Brother, one for Bauer, one for Menger, and one for our Princess Linger. Oh, and one for Little Flower." The holy gourds, which not even deifieds could harm, were plucked one by one. Han Yin collected them from the vine like she was picking grapes. She picked 3 or 4. And after this, Sky Palace leader's eyes turned green. The elders, butlers, officers, and ordinary students of Sky Palace were all dumbfounded. They couldn't speak. They watched with gaping mouths as Han Yin, in her super god spirit body, picked the gourds off the vine. How is this possible? Why is the vine not reacting to her? How can it allow a duke to collect its holy gourds? The sixth elder rubbed his eyes hard. He thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, and he had been struck with some foul hallucination. Yin Chongkong turned back to the sixth elder. His heart was screaming with joy. He tried to play it cool, but his lips were still curled up at the edges. Everyone knew he was trying to hold in his laughter. Brother Sixth, my student is quite foolish. She couldn't even get a holy gourd air on Sky Path, so she had to go and pick it up for herself. That is really silly. Ha ha ha. After saying that, Yin Chongkong began to laugh until tears rolled down his face. A holy gourd could be used as the base for a deified weapon. The process of crafting such a weapon often failed, and other rare materials were required to supplement it. But a holy gourd was priced equally with a primitive deified xenogenic gene. Seeing Han Yin pick up the fourth gourd and place it in her satchel, Sky Palace leader found himself incapable of sitting still any longer. He got up and spoke aloud. Han Yin, hurry up and enter the Sky Palace door. Stop loitering. A voice boomed and echoed across Sky Palace. It was only in Han Yin's ear though. No others could hear it. Han Yin was a smart person. When she heard that, she knew she wouldn't be allowed to collect any more gourds. She felt that was quite a shame, and she thought to herself, I didn't get one for Little Flower. But Han Yin didn't remain by the vine any longer. She took her bag of gourds and left Sky Path. She headed to the Sky Palace door. Were my eyes playing tricks on me? I think Han Yin took 4 holy gourds. One student asked with great confusion. He looked as if he had just woken up from a deep slumber. I thought I saw that too. It must be Brother Han's sister. I want to know if he would like a brother-in-law. The women of the Han family are scarier than Brother Han. His daughter made the gourd shiver, and his sister was able to just grab them off the vine. That was so weird. Why do the holy gourds treat the Han family so nicely? The vine let Han Yin collect the holy gourds without reacting at all. This family, all of them are so strong. Are you stupid? If the holy vine wasn't willing to let the gourds go, do you think a duke could have picked them? I don't know about all the other ramifications of what just happened, but I do know that Sister Han earned a lot. For holy gourds can make 4 deified weapons. Uncle Han, please take me. Chapter 26:15 Exploding Mines. Why didn't I think about collecting some gourds before I left the Sky Path? Han Sun thought with regret. There would be far more than a single holy air in every gourd. He would have been rich if he had collected a bunch of them. While Han Sun was regretting his oversight, Han Yin had reached the stone stairs that led up to Sky Palace. The words Sky Palace were shining brightly, and the sensation was so overwhelming that it was rather intimidating. It felt suppressive. Dukes weren't the only ones who would feel the strain of those words. Even a king-class elite would feel the suppression if they began ascending those stairs. Most kings wouldn't dare to lift their heads long enough to do more than glance at those words. Many of Sky Palace's nobles were eager to see how Han Yin fared on her ascent of the stone stairs of Sky Road. Han Yin's performance on the Sky Path had surprised all of Sky Palace. They were eager to see how she would perform in her ascent of the stone stairs of Sky Road. There is no doubt now that she is Han Sen's biological sister. She is so strong. Did you forget what happened when Brother Han ascended the stairs? He had to be carried. I don't know if his sister will experience the same thing or not. Brother Han was carried because he understood the 2 words of Sky Palace and what they meant. It wasn't because he was weak. Do you think Sister Han will understand the 2 words of Sky Palace and their meaning as well? She collected the gourds like she was picking apples. She took 4 of them. Understanding the meaning of 2 words won't be as difficult as taking those gourds. Yeah, I think so too. The crystallizers are likely to become significant once again, with this Han family backing them up. As everyone discussed this, Han Yin reached the stone stairs of Sky Road. Han Sun, Yin Suyi, and Thousand Feather Crane stood outside the stone stairs. If something happened to Han Yin, they could step in and save her. Han Sun wasn't worried about Han Yin being crushed under the 2 words of Sky Palace. He was worried she would end up like him, understanding the meaning behind the words and allowing them into her body. If she failed as her big brother, he would have to carry her up the rest of the way. It wouldn't be appropriate for anyone else to do that. In regards to Han Yan's talent, Han Sun was very confident. Han Sun thought his family had many people whose talent exceeded his own. He only surpassed them through his effort and determination. That was why he could do things others could not. It had nothing to do with talent. Of course, luck also played a part in it all. When Han Yan began to ascend the stone stairs of the Sky Road, she quickly felt the pressure of the words. She slowed under the sudden weight and had to lower her head. I'm not just representing myself here. I'm representing my brother. I cannot lower my head while I walk up to Sky Palace. With that thought, Han Yan's mind exploded forcefully outward. She tried to fight back against the 2 words of Sky Palace. But those 2 words carried deified power. She couldn't force them back. The more she fought, the more pressure was applied. Her neck bone almost broke. Her super god body opened again. A weird power covered Han Yan once more, sending her into King Release Sky mode. Han Sun didn't know much about Han Yan's super god body King Release Sky. He only knew that it was a causal element super god body. And in regards to how powerful King Release Sky was, Han Sun wouldn't be able to tell unless he fought her. Han Sun had discerned that Han Yan was only able to collect the holy gourds because of her super god body, but he wasn't sure exactly how she had done it. Right now, Han Yan was using her King Release Sky super god body again. Han Sun was paying keen attention, trying to understand precisely why it was so amazing. Sky Palace leader saw Han Yan fighting back against the meaning of the 2 words of Sky Palace. He smiled and spoke to the woman next to him. She is still young. Everyone was young at some point, the woman said tersely. Being reckless at such a young age isn't a bad thing. Sometimes young people need that kind of drive. Sky Palace leader laughed and said nothing. He could tell that the woman's expression hadn't changed, but anyone who understood her could tell from the corners of her eyes that she admired what Han Yan was doing. As they spoke, Han Yan was being suppressed by the meaning of the 2 words of Sky Palace. Then she suddenly straightened out her neck and body. She stared forward and continued walking toward the door of Sky Palace. The elites of Sky Palace were all confused, wondering why the meaning of the 2 words of Sky Palace now seemed to be ineffective. No way. The meaning of the 2 words of Sky Palace only affects people and creatures the first time they ascend the stone stairs. It loses its effect the second time, but this is Han Yan's first time. Why isn't it working? 6th Elder looked confused. Something was wrong. No, it worked in the beginning, but then it suddenly stopped. What kind of Geno art does Han Yan possess to be so amazing? Brother 6th stopped blabbering these questions. It would be weird for the biological sister of a guy like Han Sun to be completely ordinary. Yun Changkong gently reprimanded the 6th Elder. His quiet smile spoke for itself. Yun Changkong had agreed to take Han Yan at the behest of Han Sun and Yun Suyi. He hadn't expected that Han Yan would already be so impressive. He felt as if he had just won some sort of student lottery. Han Yan quietly walked up the stone stairs, and as she did, the others of Sky Palace thought something was amiss. They were quick to realize that the meaning of the 2 words of Sky Palace hadn't lost its effectiveness. It was working, and it was now becoming stronger. As this happened, the words shone. If the Sky Palace students looked closer, they could see that it wasn't real light. The brightness they saw was the waves of a mind that was too strong. It manifested as a physical light, shimmering with power. The higher Han Yan went, the brighter the mind powering the 2 words became. It was such a powerful mind. Only deified beings could trigger it while they walked Sky Road. But Han Yan was just a duke, and she was already able to trigger the meaning of the words to such a capacity. That was surprising. Even more frightening was the fact that such a powerful mind was still proving to be ineffective against Han Yan. The mind was like a moonlit spring. Han Yan ascended the stone stairs dressed in all white, like a fairy bathing in moonlight. Her black hair floated in the shimmering moonlight behind her. Many of the young students of Sky Palace couldn't take their eyes off her. I'm in love, a male student said. He stared at Han Yan longingly, while clutching his chest. He almost had stars in his eyes. She is a true fairy. Many of the eyes of young Sky Palace students gleamed like hungry wolves. As this happened, Han Yan slowly walked beneath the pressure of the meaning of the 2 words of the Sky Palace plaque. She had finished her ascent of the stone stairs. According to the past experience of the sky, the power of the mind behind the words would now be reduced. But this time, Sky Palace's two-word mind did not reduce. It exploded like a volcano. Chapter 26:16 White Elephant. As everyone watched in confusion, the meaning of the two words of Sky Palace exploded, and something flew out into the air. What is that? Han-sun was shocked. He looked at Yun-sui, never having heard of anything like this happening before. I don't know. Yun-sui was just as stunned as the rest. She had never heard of a physical item emerging from the sign that held the words of Sky Palace. All the rest of the sky were amazed as well. The last thing they had expected was for an object to fly out of that sign. They stared at it blankly. The thing that flew out of the sign looked like an elephant. It was white like jade, but only 1 foot long. The elephant's tusks appeared to be made of crystal. Everyone looked at that small elephant in befuddlement. They had no idea why it had suddenly appeared there. The defensive systems of Sky Palace were rock solid. It would be impossible for them to be unaware of a xenogeniac hiding out inside that big sign. The small white elephant flew over until it was right in front of Han Yen. It then expanded, growing to the size of a mammoth. Strangely, after the white elephant appeared, the meaning behind the two words of Sky Palace disappeared. The sign went back to normal. The white elephant reached out its trunk and wrapped it around Han Yan's body. Han-sun's muscles tensed. He thought the white elephant was going to harm his sister, and he leaped forward. After he took a step forward, though, he realized that the white elephant was just lifting her up to sit on its back. Once Han Yen was astride its back, the white elephant turned around and headed deeper into Sky Palace. Seeing that the elephant wasn't a threat, Han-sun felt instantly relieved. But still, he made sure to follow closely behind them. Many sky elders also hurried forward to examine the strange white elephant as it walked farther into Sky Palace. It was so weird. No one had known that the Sky Palace sign had a white elephant hiding out in it. The situation was so odd that it was hard to believe. Even Sky Palace leader came down for a closer look. He ransacked his mind for an explanation of where the white elephant had come from, but he couldn't come up with one. Just by feeling the white elephant's presence, he could tell that it was a deified creature. A deified creature had been hiding out in that sign, and no one in Sky Palace had known. That was simply embarrassing for the other deifieds inside Sky Palace. But they knew immediately that the white elephant must have a long history with Sky Palace, so no one tried to attack it. They followed the white elephant, keen to see what it might do. Mr. Leader, what is this white elephant? Han-sun was still worried about Han Yen, and so he asked Sky Palace leader once the man arrived. Don't worry. I will assure her safety. I won't allow her to get hurt, Sky Palace leader said as he continued to walk. When Han-sun heard him say that, he relaxed a little, but he still didn't feel calm. He felt even more worried. That was because it sounded as if not even Sky Palace leader understood what the white elephant was, and where it had come from. Although this entire scenario sounded a bit unbelievable in which a deified creature had resided in Sky Palace without anyone knowing about its existence. This was actually happening. Han-sun gritted his teeth and followed the white elephant. The white elephant showed no sign of being hostile though, and it was moving forward at a rather slow pace. Han Yen looked down, observing her mount quizzically. While she was surprised to find herself atop its back, she hadn't been hurt in any way. Little Yen, are you okay? Han-sun asked as he followed the white elephant. I'm okay. Is this some sort of induction ceremony for Sky Palace? Han Yen asked with curiosity. Can you get off its back? Han-sun asked. Yes. Do you want me to come down? Han Yen asked. Yes, come down for now, Han-sun said. Han Yen flew off of the white elephant's back. But as soon as she broke contact with the creature, the white elephant's trunk snatched her and made her sit down again. The white elephant didn't hurt her, however. It placed her down gently and resumed its walk. Let her sit there for now. I promise not an ounce of harm will befall a single hair on her pretty head, Sky Palace leader said with a squint of his eyes. A white elephant had flown out of the Sky Palace sign. That was mysterious, to say the least. All of the Sky Palace students thought this was amazing, and they were curious about what the white elephant was. But most of the students were eventually stopped and prohibited from following the white elephant. Only the elders and other leaders of Sky Palace were allowed to follow beyond that point. The white elephant carried Han Yin through the Sky Palace hall. Then, they came to the gardens of Sky Palace. This was where the rulers of Sky Palace had lived down through history. Now, it belonged to the man who was walking next to Han's senator. Ordinary people weren't permitted entry. Han's son and the others followed the white elephant in. It was like a natural garden, with mountains and the smell of grass. It was like a fairy's grove. Rare xenogenic plants were scattered about here and there. Just the sight of them made Han's son want to get out his knife and start cutting. The big white elephant carried Han Yin to the back of the garden. They went to a wall with a small pond beside it. The wall had 2 words that were roughly engraved: outer sky. Those 2 words were jaggedly carved. Even though Han's son didn't know much about calligraphy, he knew those words had been written by a young man. But how could a young man have made an inscription in this place? That was where the rulers of Sky Palace rested. Other people weren't permitted entry, and they surely couldn't leave evidence of their presence. The white elephant walked in front of the mountain wall, then lowered its trunk into the water. As the water swirled around its trunk, the elephant seemed to be feeling around for something. Everyone looked at the big white elephant, having no idea what it was doing. After a while, the white elephant lifted its trunk from the water. It was holding something. The object was a box made of jade, and it was a foot long. The onlookers glanced at each other, unsure what the appearance of this random box signified. Sky Palace leader looked at the jade box and frowned. He had an idea of what the box might be, but he wasn't sure. The white elephant lifted its trunk and passed the jade box to Han Yin. And then, it lay down next to the pond and closed its eyes. It looked as if it had gone to sleep. Han Yin, come over here, Sky Palace leader said to Han Yin, who had just received that box. Han Yin saw Hansen nodding, so she got off of the white elephant. This time, the white elephant didn't respond. It allowed Han Yin to move away with the box in her hands. Open the box, Sky Palace leader told Han Yin. Palace leader, will there be danger inside the jade box? Hansen asked worriedly. No. Sky Palace leader shook his head, a strange expression on his face. Is this? Yin Changkong's face changed. He seemed to come to a realization, and he looked at the jade box in astonishment. Chapter 26:17 Sword given to the luckiest person. Sky Palace leader nodded to the 10th elder. If I'm correct, then it is what you're thinking. I cannot believe it was in Sky Palace all along. It was right under my nose. Is it possible? Yin Changkong's voice trembled. He stared at Han Yan's jade box. The jade box gleamed in the light. There weren't many adornments or engravings on it. It was a simple box, with no markings or patterns to identify it. Many Sky Palace elites wouldn't have been able to tell what it was. Old Yun, you should explain what is inside that jade box. The 6th elder couldn't help but ask. Yun Changkong looked at Sky Palace leader, who nodded. Yun Changkong's expression was difficult to read as he said, You guys know about the 11th leader, right? Yes. The 11th leader was a Sky Palace genius. Everyone knows about him. He was the strongest elite in Sky Palace that entered the Geno Hall. 6th elder rolled his eyes, but then his eyes widened and his face lost its color. Is this jade box related to the 11th leader? Yin Changkong nodded and said, You guys should remember the records that were created before the 11th leader went into the Geno Hall. He left behind words. The sword that will go to the luckiest person. Many elders shouted at the same moment. Everyone's eyes opened wide. They stared at the jade box Han Yin was holding. Yin Changkong nodded solemnly. The 11th leader's sword skills were so fierce. He was like a god. He was a sword master from a family of swordsmen, and his talents brought him great strength. The 11th leader's sword skills were remarkable, even from a young age. He practiced with swords at the age of 3 years old. His sword mind reached the level of deified before he was 20 years old. He became the leader of Sky Palace before he was deified. When our race was in crisis, He destroyed traitors and battled enemies. Back then, even all the deified elders listened to him, so they could make Sky Palace the best it could be. We have been stable for 1 billion years because of him. Referring to his lifetime as the sky's golden age isn't even enough to describe him. He was the one who left the inscription near Sky Pond that reads Outer Sky. Special people do special things. The 11th leader's sword skills weren't passed on to anyone else in Sky Palace. He didn't educate a single student. Before he went to the Geno Hall, he said, "Fate will search the universe, and the sword will be given to the luckiest person." But no one has ever figured out who that luckiest person might be. Until now, no one has found any sign of the 11th leader's sword skills. But people always knew he left his sword around somewhere. Many people have searched for that treasure across the universe, but they always came up empty-handed, Yin Changkong said. He stared at Han Yan's jade box. How do you know the jade box contains the 11th leader's sword skills? The 6th elder asked with confusion. Yin Changkong had a wry smile as he answered, "This jade box is made from outer world jade. It only exists in Sky Palace. It is so rare that no one else could have this much of it. Even if someone had some, they wouldn't come here and drop their outer world jade in the Sky Pond. Aside from our leaders, who else could do this? There have been many leaders here over the years. How do you know this belongs to the 11th leader?" The 6th elder asked. He was still confused. Yin Changkong pointed at the white elephant who was fast asleep near the Sky Pond. "Don't you remember what the 11th leader's mount was?" "I have heard it was a hitting sky elephant. But I thought the hitting sky elephant disappeared when the 11th leader went to the Geno Hall." When he realized what he was saying, the 6th elder trailed off in astonishment. His eyes opened wide as he looked at Han Yan's jade box. He screamed, "Is that really the 11th leader's sword skill? We should open it and find out," Sky Palace leader said. "Let me open it," the 6th elder said merrily. He walked close to Han Yan and tried to grab the box. Before his hands could even touch the jade box, he felt a strong power come from behind. It sucked him backward. Pang! The 6th elder flew back through the air and slammed into the stone inscribed with the words Outer Sky. His face was almost crushed against the hard surface. The white elephant near the pond had only moved his nose an inch. He didn't open his eyes. He was still sleeping. When Yin Changkong saw the other elder's shaken expression, he chuckled and said, "Brother 6, you are in too much of a rush. Think about the 11th leader's personality. He wouldn't allow just anyone to open his box." The 6th elder stood up slowly, wincing in pain as he moved. He stared at the white elephant, but he didn't make any aggressive moves. If the white elephant was the 11th leader's mount, it would be stronger than a normal deified creature. "Han Yan, open the box," Sky Palace leader told Han Yan. Han Yan looked at Han Sun, and Han Sun nodded for her to do as she was told. Han Yan felt as if she had gotten quite lucky. This seemed to be a very rare opportunity that she had received, and maybe the 11th leader had left behind great resources. If that was true, perhaps she wouldn't have to struggle so much to level up. Han Yan held the jade box. It wasn't locked, so she lifted the lid and opened the jade box. A shadow flew out. It was in the shape of a gentleman. His age would be difficult to guess, but he appeared to be rather young. He gave off an aura of someone who carried a great burden, however. "It looks like you guys never thought I'd leave this behind at the bottom of Sky Pond. But don't worry. After all, you guys are my descendants. I wouldn't expect you to guess how my mind worked. Right now, whoever is in charge of Sky Palace needs to listen to me. The luckiest person, the person the white elephant selected, is the one who will receive my sword skills. Only that person can get what is inside this box. If anyone goes against this will of mine, bad luck will fall upon them. It is quite funny. I bet many creatures are looking all over the universe for this. I wonder which of the sky was this lucky." After saying that, the shadow disappeared. No one knew where it went. Sky Palace leader and the others looked strange. The legends said that the 11th leader was a very heroic and smart man. They did not expect him to be such a kid. It looked like he was quite the prankster. "Old elder, you are so unreliable. The white elephant chose a person who wasn't even one of the sky. She is just a foreign student." Sky Palace leader felt so depressed that he didn't know what to say. According to the 11th leader's words, the sword skills had to be given to Han Yen. The most secret skills of Sky Palace were about to be hers. If they didn't give the skills to her, that would mean they were betraying the will and direction of the 11th leader. That decision would reflect poorly upon them. The most important thing, however, was the fact that the 11th leader's mount was still there. The white elephant was bound to intervene if they tried to take the knowledge away from Han Yen. All the elders of Sky Palace looked confused. None of them said a word. Chapter 26:18 Taking a student for teaching in an office of Sky Palace. A collection of elders, officers and other high-class people were discussing the events with great excitement. We're talking about the 11th leader's sword skill here. It is one of Sky Palace's secret techniques. After being buried for all these years, it has finally been revealed. It should be a part of Sky Palace's armory. We can't allow an outsider to claim it. The one who got it was a foreign student after all. But you're wrong. The 11th elder left this request. How could we disobey his final wish? This only happened because he was too old to understand that the white elephant might unwittingly select an outsider. A foreign student, no less. The high-class people of Sky Palace had split into 3 different camps. One camp suggested putting the sword skill into Sky Palace's list of secret skills, where only the truly important figures of the sky could view. Another camp believed they should honor the final command of the 11th leader and allow Han Yen to practice the sword skill she had been given. The final group wanted to take the 11th leader's sword skill to a place where they could research it. They wanted to modify it so all of Sky Palace's students could practice it. Leader, please say something. The 6th elder supported the group that wished to take the sword skill and put it on the restricted list. After the 6th elder spoke, everyone realized that Sky Palace leader had yet to say anything in the discussion. Sky Palace leader said coldly, "There is no need to discuss this." "What do you mean, leader?" Sky Chance officer asked Sky Palace leader with confusion. Sky Palace leader looked at him. Then he turned his gaze back to everyone else who was present. "It doesn't matter what decision we make if we can't get our hands on the sword skill, does it? Why could we not get it? We can ask Han Yen to present it to us. Would she dare not to? It belongs to Sky Palace. And if you want to take it back, then we would be totally within our rights," Sky Chance officer said flatly. "You really think that would be an acceptable course of action?" "Yes, you are technically correct. But it sounds to me like you're not giving any consideration to the 11th leader and his request," Yin Chongkong said mockingly. "I would never insult the 11th leader. However, I don't think the 11th leader expected that he would end up handing over his skill to someone who wasn't even a sky. We are merely fulfilling our responsibility as leaders of our people. I am sure that his spirit in heaven would agree with our decision," Sky Chance officer said confidently. Sky Palace leader squinted, smiled and said, "Sky Chance officer is correct. We could argue that we were merely using our authority, but clearly, the 11th leader knew we would want to take advantage of this situation. He sent his mount hitting Sky Elephant to protect the skill and prevent young ones like us from stealing it under the guise of protecting our people. Do you have another plan to sort this out that involves the use of our authority? If Han Yen is willing to hand it over, the hitting Sky Big Elephant shouldn't," Sky Chance officer said, before going quiet. He didn't believe a single word that he was saying. The skill wasn't recorded in text. Rather, it had taken the form of a jade sword. The white elephant wouldn't part with the jade sword for a minute. The white elephant didn't care if Han Yin used the sword, but if anyone else came close to it, the hitting Sky Elephant would attack them. The 6th elder was a prime example of what might happen if the white elephant got annoyed. The hitting Sky Elephant is just a low-intelligence xenogeniac. I doubt it knows much. We can trap it and take the jade sword away. How could it stop us then?" An elder said with a hoarse voice. "7th elder, this is Sky Palace. We aren't a den of thieves," Yin Chongkong said disparagingly. "Yin Chongkong, don't let this become personal. Han Yin might be your student, But the sword skill is part of the legacy of Sky Palace. It isn't your personal possession, the seventh elder said with a cold grunt. Yin Changkong was enraged by this, and he said, "What is that supposed to mean?" "You know what I mean. You shouldn't have to ask." "Changkong, what the seventh elder said makes sense. That is how we will settle this matter," Sky Palace leader said to stop them both from fighting. "Leader," Yin Changkong said looking sick. "Leader, you are so smart." The seventh elder grinned widely. Sky Palace leader ignored Yin Changkong's icy stare. He smiled at the seventh elder and said, "Since you were the one to suggest this idea, seventh elder, please proceed with your plan to trap the hitting sky elephant. Then bring the jade sword to me." "Palace leader, how am I supposed to do it alone? I need you to send some more deophytes with me. I'll need them to trap the creature." The seventh elder's face changed. He could tell that the leader's proposal didn't sound right. "I can't help you with that, I'm afraid," Sky Palace leader said calmly. "I'm hoping Han Sun can make a few more deophytes to balance out Han Yan's acquisition of the skill. But I can't lend you aid at the same time. You should think of a way. It's your idea. Don't you think you can do it? You are eligible for a grand reward if you do." This seventh elder's face was turning green. Yin Changkong felt relief flow through him. Sky Palace leader was protecting Han Yan. Many of the elders and officers, who had wanted to take the jade sword by force, had suddenly stopped talking. Sky Palace leader wanted to protect Han Yan. And with Han Sen's reputation as well, none of them were bold enough to try to get the jade sword by themselves. By doing so, they would be disobeying the leader's orders and disrespecting Han Sun at the same time. Han Sun would likely never bless them if that occurred. Plus, Han Sun had two true god weapons, and he had drawn the attention of the very high. He would only continue to gain power as time went by. If they stole things from Han Yan now, they'd be making an enemy of Han Sr. "I will support whoever gets the sword skill back. If you can truly claim it, then I will reward you handsomely," Sky Palace leader said while looking at everybody. No one chose to speak. Hansen didn't think the matter would be resolved so easily. The people of Sky Palace wouldn't let such an important sword skill land in Han Yan's hands. But what he expected didn't come to pass. Sky Palace didn't come up with an excuse to take the 11th leader's sword skill for themselves. But Yin Changkong also didn't take Han Yan as a student. Instead, he asked his teacher to be her teacher. In effect, he made Han Yan his little sister. That was another way of saying that she was on the same level as Sky Palace leader. After the teacher ceremony, Han Yan standing in Sky Palace became obscenely high despite her young age. Even Lone Bamboo, when he saw her, would have to refer to her respectfully. Han Yan had picked holy gourds, received the legendary sword skill, and become a fellow student with Yin Changkong. She instantly became a legend all across Sky Palace. Her reputation exceeded even Lone Bamboo's. Everyone knew Han Sun had an awesome sister. Of course, what most students were fond of was her appearance. Many students had discussed the subject of Han Sun potentially blessing her. Perhaps that was why she was so strong at such a young age. That made them want Han Sen's blessing even more. Chapter 26-19 Black King City. On the little Jade Island, Han Sun, Han Yan, and Bauer were sitting at a table with 4 gourds of various sizes laid out across it. They were the 4 gourds Han Yan had collected from the holy vine. The 3 of them had briefly examined the gourds, but they still didn't know how to get the holy air out of them. "Bauer, can't you make these things release their holy air?" Hansen asked, glancing at Bauer. Bauer shook her head. "I could if I was at the vine, but not right now." "Does that mean retrieving them was pointless then?" Hansen felt depressed. "Stop trying. Once the holy gourds are separated from the holy vine, the holy air inside of them solidifies. They won't release anything." Yin Changkong smiled as he walked over to them. Yin Suyi and Yin Susang were following behind him. "Greetings, brother," Han Yin said. She stood up and bowed to Yin Changkong. "Greetings, auntie." Yin Suyi and Yin Susang bowed as well. "Why is this so messed up?" Hansen thought. He bowed to Yin Changkong too, but only referred to him as Elder Yin. The Yin sisters said hi to him. They had been close for some time, so there was no need for a great deal of politeness. After Han Sun instructed them all to take a seat, he had Zero come and pour the tea. Yin Chongkong had a sip and then said, "The holy gourds cannot release holy air now that they have been picked. But they are a material that can be used to forge deified treasures. We should conduct a test and learn what elements they are associated with. Then, I will have Sky Chance's department make the treasure for you. However, making the treasures will still require other materials, and they might be expensive. The process isn't guaranteed to be successful either. I would wager it to be 50-50. What kind of materials will I be needing?" Han Yin asked. "We won't know that until we test the holy gourds. After we have decided what sort of treasure you want, then we can make a list of the materials that will be required." Yin Chongkong smiled and went on to say, "Don't worry about it, little sister. I will pay for the materials in return for your willingness to join us. Please do not object to my insistence. It is settled." Upon seeing Yin Chongkong's certainty, Han Yin didn't turn down his offer. After chatting for a while, Yin Chongkong turned to Han Sr. "Han Sun, have you not been to the 5 cities?" "No, not yet." Han Sun shook his head and said, "I wanted to go to the 5 cities, but a guard told me I need some sort of special pass." Yin Chongkong pulled out a piece of paper with a black symbol written on it. "The 5 cities are different from the 12 towers. It is very dangerous there, and the cities are all different from one another. Until you heal, you shouldn't go to the latter 4. This is the Black King City spell of the 5 cities. If you have this, you will be allowed to enter the Black King City. Perhaps it can help you. But remember, you cannot lose the pass if you enter there. And you cannot kill anything inside. Otherwise, you will land in a lot of hot water." "What is inside the Black King City?" Han Sun asked with curiosity. "I can't tell you, but you will find out as soon as you go there," Yin Chongkong said, waving his hand with a mysterious air. "This spell can only allow one person inside?" Han Sun asked with more curiosity. Yin Chongkong nodded and said, "In the future, little sister's spell will be handled by Sky Palace leader. Her level is low now, so it is pointless for her to venture into the 5 cities. We will need to wait until she is king class. Then she will receive her 5 cities spell." Although Han Yin was now Yin Chongkong's sister, she was still his student. Yin Chongkong was explaining things to Han Yin just like an average instructor would. With Yin Chongkong only being the senior student, the atmosphere was so unnatural. The Yin sisters were very quiet because of it. Yin Chongkong understood why though. He dropped the info and left, leaving Yin Suyi and Yin Susang behind. When only the youngsters remained, the atmosphere became far more relaxed and comfortable. Amidst the liveliness, Han Sun was keen on asking the Yin sisters about the Black King City. "Father said that our powers are too weak, and we cannot go in yet. That is why we don't know much about the cities. I have heard that Black King City is the safest of all the cities. As long as you keep the spell on your person, and you don't have any intent to kill within you, it shouldn't be too dangerous for you to go to the Black King City." Yin Sui stopped to think for a moment, then said, "The legends claim that Black King City has many rare treasures in it. Many of the people that entered there came back with grand trophies, but they were never willing to say how they came into possession of them." The Yin sisters didn't know much about the Black King City, which only made Han Sun even more curious. The next day, he rode his legless crane to the White Jade Jing. He wanted to see the Black King City, so he could see what was so special about it. Of course, when he reached the gate of the city, Han Sun was stopped by a Sky Palace student. "Mr. Han, I'm so sorry. Without a pass from the leader, no one is allowed to enter the Black King City." That guard had once attended lessons taught by Han Sun, so he was very polite. "Will this do?" Han Sun took out his pass and handed it over to the guard. The student inspected it and then let him pass. Before Han Sun went though, the guard reminded him that he must carry his spell at all times. He couldn't at any cost lose the spell. Han Sun thanked the guard and entered Black King City. From the outside, the city looked like an ancient place built from black jade. It looked old. It was mysterious and cold. After entering the Black King City, Han Sun was shocked by what he saw. He had thought Black King City was a mysterious place, and that there might be dark and dangerous creatures out on the prowl. He at least thought it might look like the White Jade Tower, albeit with the presence of creatures. But as Han's son stepped onto the city's main street, he saw that the place was quite populated. It was a town with all sorts of people. There were merchants and farmers. There were even restaurants in which people relaxed and chatted as they ate. If Han's son hadn't come in through the clearly defined entrance, he'd have assumed he had gone to the wrong place. This place shouldn't have been called Black King City. It was more like a small town on some underdeveloped planet. Peanuts, walnuts, pears, dates. A seller was barking down the street. Han's son could see a farmer leading a cow. There were chickens clucking in cages and dogs barking at one another on the street. Han's son felt strangely unsettled as he walked down the street. When he was young, not even his home had been this underdeveloped. This was the sort of thing he might have seen in an old movie. Han's son looked at the ancient city people around him, and noted that they looked very human. They were almost exactly the same as his own people. How is this possible? How can there be humans here? Han's son mumbled to himself in shock. They looked exactly like humans. They were different from the very high, the sky, and the extreme king. They did not have the additional features that the other races had. They were practically identical to humans. Am I having some sort of hallucination? They cannot be humans, Han's son thought to himself. Soon after, though, he realized that what he was seeing couldn't just be some sort of illusion. The beings around him were obviously living humans. Han's son wanted to use his Dongxian aura to examine them more closely, but he found that his power was all gone. Not a single speck of it remained. Chapter 26:20 Anvil. What a weird city. It suppresses my power. Although my body is as strong as usual, I don't think I'll be able to any more powers than any ordinary creature can. I'm like an ordinary being now. Han's son was shocked. He tried activating all kinds of geno-arts, but he couldn't find any that were usable in that strange realm. As Han's son tried to figure out exactly how his power was being limited, a sky man approached him and bowed politely. Brother Han, my name is Bo Chin. I am a tour guide for Black King City. Brother Bo Chin, what is going on? Han's son asked, looking at the city's civilians. Bo Chin laughed and said, there is a cafe nearby with excellent tea. Since we're close, let's have a cup of the stuff and discuss the city, shall we? What's going on in Black King City is rather complicated, so it can take a while to explain. Yes, please do that, Brother Bo Chin. Han's son followed Bo Chin to a nearby cafe on a street corner. The two of them sat in a room on the second floor. They could look out across crossroads in front of them, which gave them a view of half the city. Bo Chin ordered some tea. Han's son was still partially convinced that the whole city was merely an illusion, but when he took a sip of his tea, he was forced to discard that idea. The tea had a sweet fragrance, and its taste was just divine. It was definitely not an illusion. Don't worry, Brother Han. Black King City is a very real place. It's just different. This dimension only contains this town. The beings here can only live in the city. They live and die here, unable to practice or grow their strength. Furthermore, their lifespan is only a few decades, Bo Chin said with a smile. If these people here can never practice, why is the place so dangerous that I need a spell with me at all times? Han's son asked, confused. If things were really as Bo Chin said, then nothing in that place could hurt him. Why would Yin Chongkong have warned him so seriously? The beings in Black King City are ordinary, but the city itself is not. I believe you have already felt it, in that our power has been restricted. Aside from the strength of our bodies, our powers are lost. Even if we only have our physical powers, the beings here cannot hurt us. Bo Chin nodded and said, the beings here cannot harm us, but the rules that bind Black King City can. They might even kill us. There are two things you cannot do in Black King City. One is that you cannot lose your Black King spell. The second rule is that you cannot harm the other beings here. It doesn't matter how weak they are. If you hurt them, you will be punished by the rules of Black King City. Even if you're deified, the consequences are dire. Then what is the point of us coming here? Han's son asked with a frown. There is a point. The creatures here are weak, but the stuff in their houses isn't. There are 1987 houses here. Many generations of these people have lived in the same houses. They have treasures in their abodes that hail from eras that are long past. For the beings that live here, never practicing, they are a waste. If we were able to claim them, however, they might have some use. Think about it. There might even be deified treasures just hanging around like easy pickings. Bo Qin paused before going on to say, but in Black King City, you cannot steal. You cannot rob. You cannot bring harm to the occupants. The people must give you their items willingly. If you violate these terms, Black King City will punish you even if you are deified. That is a very strange set of rules. But if the people here don't practice, where can these treasures possibly come from? Hansen asked. Sure, I don't know. Just like nobody knows why the White Jade Jing exists. No one knows why Black King City operates the way it does, and where the people that live here come from. And no one knows how they can keep on living in this small city. All we have to do is try and take the items that we might need, Bo Qin said. Can I trade with them? Hansen asked. Yes, but you cannot force them into an exchange, Bo Qin answered. Hansen asked more about the situation involving Black King City, and Bo Qin informed him of what he knew. He made sure to stress the taboos involved with living there. As Hansen was readying himself to leave, Bo Qin said, Remember, Brother Han, we cannot use our powers here. Even if deified treasures are right in front of us, we can't tell what they are without our powers. We can only see what they look like. Sometimes you'll find that you've spent a lot of effort in return for a barren class piece of junk. That is a frequent occurrence in Black King City. So be careful what you select. If you find something you like, don't miss out. I sincerely hope you can get a deified treasure. Thank you for explaining all of this to me, Brother Bo Qin. Hansen said goodbye and departed the cafe. He hit the streets again. After walking a few steps, he saw a blacksmith's smithy erupt with sparks. Two shirtless blacksmiths were swinging their hammers, with each strike of the anvil making a ding-ding sound. When Hansen saw the anvil, his eyes brightened. The anvil was pitch black, and it was shaped something like the head of a bull. It was flat on its top and thin near the bottom. It looked quite aged, however. It seemed to be caked in rust, but Hansen could tell that it wasn't actually rusty. The red color was rising from within the anvil. The anvil was a platform that the blacksmiths used to hammer iron weaponry. When the iron was pulled out of the fire, they would use hammers to shape the red-hot metal atop the anvil. Hansen could tell that the anvil was very old. God only knew how many years it had resided in the blacksmith's smithy, but it hadn't yet broken, and there were no dents or markings to testify to its eons of use. He could tell that it was quite a special item. If it hadn't been, there would have been the telling signature of hammer marks and scorched clumps of iron atop it. Not having any marks would be impossible for an ordinary item. Is this anvil a treasure? What level is it, I wonder? Hansen stood outside the smithy as he leered at the anvil. He couldn't use his powers, so he couldn't discern the rank of the anvil. This anvil must be a treasure. I just can't tell what level it is. It might not be too bad. Many Sky Palace students must have wanted that thing through the years, but the blacksmiths that live here cannot do their work without the anvil. So, after all these generations, no blacksmith has been willing to sell or part with the anvil, said a familiar voice behind Han. Senator Hansen turned around to see Exquisite next to him. She was robed in white clothing. Chapter 26-21 At 6 Gene Mutant People, Lady Exquisite. Can you tell which of the city's items are Geno treasures? Hansen asked Exquisite. Exquisite shook her head. No, but I can see something you cannot. Hansen observed the anvil for a while. Then he began to walk on down the street. Are you going to give up without even trying? Exquisite asked coldly when she caught up to Han Sr. I bet that countless people from Sky Palace have already tried to take that anvil. I was standing there for a while, and the looks that the blacksmith was giving me weren't very friendly. I would rather go somewhere else where the reception is not so uninviting, Hansen said as he looked around. As Hansen was checking out the city, the civilians in the city checked him out in return. The city wasn't big. and there weren't many people. They all lived there, so they knew each other well. Non-natives stood out quite a bit there. Plus, the people in that city were looking at Han Sun with hostile eyes. There was nothing warm or inviting about them. Han Sun could understand their attitude. In the past, Sky Palace students must have performed quite a few scams to steal their goods. These people certainly wouldn't enjoy outsiders coming in just to make off with their things. Yun Chongkong hadn't been willing to divulge the specifics of the Black King City to him. It was probably because Sky Palace students had done many things in that city that no one would be proud of. The people of that old city didn't like outsiders, but they weren't picking any fights. They only walked around Han Sun with cold stares. It was likely they had been taken advantage of before. The students of Sky Palace had their power restricted in the city, but they still had their physical strength. Ordinary creatures couldn't stand against power like that. If it wasn't for Black King City's rules, any Sky Palace student could bring down the entire city with their fists. No wonder Bo Chin said it was harder to get something in Black King City these days. Han Sun shook his head with a wry smile. He wasn't very good at talking, and his ability to communicate with others was below average. He didn't think he would gain much from this city. Now that he didn't have access to his powers, he was unable to tell which item was a treasure and which was just a normal item. He could only rely on his gut instincts and eyesight. Han Sun tried to summon a beast soul, but beast souls were restricted as well. He couldn't bring anything out of his sea of soul. That stopped his cheating mind in its tracks. Lady Exquisite, do you know what race the people here belong to? Why do they look like crystallizers? Han Sun said as he walked. After a moment of thought, Exquisite said, "This is just their appearance. They aren't true crystallizers. They aren't like any race in this entire universe, actually. They are just creatures of the Black King City. They can't leave this place. They must spend their entire lives inside this city." Are the creatures in the other 4 cities similar to these? After Han Sun asked that, a strange feeling whelmed him. He was from Sky Palace, but he was asking an outsider about what might be members of his own species. Exquisite didn't seem to give Han Sun's question much thought. She shook her head and said, "Each of the 5 cities is different. The inhabitants all have special traits and quirks. The other cities aren't as safe as Black King City. Even deifieds can die in them with a little bad luck." Han Sun and Exquisite continued to walk and talk, sightseeing their way through the city. The grass, the wood, the bricks, and the slate of the region looked very old and heavy. Han Sun felt as if he was walking through the streets of a vintage film. Everything there looked like treasures, but they weren't. "It sucks not having my ability to sense things," Han Sun sighed. But he suddenly remembered he had crystallizer glasses. He didn't know if the crystallizer technology would work in the city, so he gave it a try. Han Sun put the glasses on his face and looked at the people in the city. Data scrolled across the lenses. Target locked, analyzing data. The voice of glasses sounded in Han Sun's ears. The data continued to flash across the lenses. "Why are you wearing glasses?" Exquisite felt as if what Han Sun was doing was rather weird. She looked at the glasses. Glasses wasn't a treasure, so Exquisite wasn't surprised by his ability to put them on. "These people don't like us. Wearing glasses to hide our faces might help us steal items. They won't be able to immediately recognize me if I wear these," Han Sun explained. When she heard Han Sun say that, Exquisite looked at the people and said, "You think too much. Anyone who takes an item from this place will be branded a threat, and they will never be able to come back." Han Sun laughed and didn't respond. He continued walking. Not long later, Glasses had results ready for him. Target: at 6 type mutant genes. Male. Calculated gene age 34. Gene level, none. Gene potential, none. What is an at 6 type mutant gene? Han Sun asked the Glasses in shock. It indicates that it is a creature. The number 6 means it is from the 6th branch of creatures, Glasses answered. What does that mean? Han Sun tried to ask it. At is at. The AI of the Glasses had the maturity of a 6-year-old. She was unable to answer Han Sun's questions. Are they related to the crystallizers in any way? Han Sun changed his approach with his questions. No, Glasses answered hastily. Han Sun asked her about a few other races that looked similar, But Glasses refuted each suggestion. Can I see what other creatures might exist? Hansen asked, not willing to give up yet. Information incomplete. Cannot answer, Glasses answered. Since he couldn't get any more information out of Glasses, Hansen put his mind on the city. Glasses could be used, but she could only scan creatures. She didn't scan treasures. And so Hansen would have to depend on his luck for any decisions he made on that prospect. If you follow me to the very high, I can tell you where a deified treasure lies and how to claim it for yourself, Exquisite said as two of them walked around the streets. Hansen was coming up empty-handed thus far. Where is a deified treasure? Hansen asked her quickly. Exquisite had been tricked by Hansen once before. She looked at him silently, not willing to answer his question. Hansen couldn't trick her into giving him more information. So he shrugged and said, "But you should at least tell me what sort of treasure it is. The city is very small. If I told you what it is, you would find it." Exquisite rolled her eyes. Hansen was surprised. It was rare to see her express that much emotion. Never mind then. After a moment of thought, Hansen decided to return to the blacksmith's smithy. Sky Palace had controlled Black King City for many years. All the best stuff had probably been taken by this point. Even if there was something good left to get, it would be either extremely difficult to claim or impossible to find. So far, the anvil was the only thing Hansen had seen that interested him. And so, that was what he was going to try to claim. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.